Britain is in paralysis. Some 1.5 million working men and women have downed tools in the general strike's first full day. The miners' lockout enters its fourth. At Bluefields on the Mosquito Coast, the cruiser Cleveland is ordered south. The State Department prepares once more to land Marines on Nicaraguan soil. In Highland Park this week, the Ford Motor Company brings in the 5-day week. 40 years past, on this very night, men at the Haymarket in this city demanded the same. 4 of them met the rope. And in Warsaw, the Skrzyński cabinet stands at the edge of failure. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Tuesday, the 4th of May, 1926. From London, Britain has stopped. The general strike called by the Trades Union Congress took effect at 1 minute before midnight last evening. So far as the cables that the Atlantic carriers have passed permit us to say, no major industry that was out yesterday has returned today. Transport across the country stands halted. The London Underground does not run. The omnibuses do not run. The trams do not run. The great main lines from St. Pancras, from Euston, from Paddington stand empty. The docks at Liverpool, at Hull, at Cardiff, at Glasgow are idle. The printing trade is out. The morning papers, save those the government has organized by other means, did not appear. The iron and steel works are out. The building trade is out. By the most cautious count, 1.5 million working men and women have left their tools in support of the locked-out coal miners. Some 205 unions have answered the call. The lockout is the matter at the heart of the dispute. For 9 months past, the British government subsidized the wages of the miner under threat of a stoppage. In those 9 months, the mine owners and the cabinet prepared for the day the subsidy would end. On Friday last, the subsidy ended. On Saturday, the lockout notices went up at the pithead. The miner was informed that his wage was to be cut, his hours lengthened, his old district agreements torn up, and that if he objected, he might find his own way home from the mine. The Trades Union Congress called the strike in answer. The government of Mr. Baldwin has set the country upon emergency footing. The state of emergency was declared at the close of last week under the Act of 1920. Special constables are sworn in this morning by the thousand. Volunteers, drawn from the universities, from the clerks of the city, from those, in short, who can spare a fortnight from their own affairs, have been put behind the wheels of lorries. Soldiers have been mobilized. The fleet has been ordered into home waters. Hyde Park has been turned into a milk depot under military guard. Mr. Churchill at the Exchequer is understood to be preparing a government newspaper for the morning. Mr. Baldwin has spoken to the press. The strike, he tells the country, is no industrial dispute. It is a challenge to Parliament, a thing tending toward revolution, which the constitutional government of His Majesty cannot tolerate. Such is the formulation. The mine owner's wage notice is on the pithead. The fleet is at the docks. Voices on the left of the labor movement urge the General Council to widen the strike, to call out the engineers, the textile mills, the postal employees. The General Council has not seen fit to do so. The Council, we are given to understand, hopes for a settlement and prefers not to direct an action larger than the one already underway. What is to be observed at the close of this first day is the discipline. The wires from every district report the same thing. The men have gone out without disorder. The women's auxiliaries are already organizing relief. The trades councils are at their work. The picket lines, where they are needed, hold. The country is stopped. The miners hold. The council, in its offices at Eccleston Square, watches the cables and waits. Closer to home, on Saturday last, the 1st of May, the Ford Motor Company put its great works at River Rouge and at Highland Park upon the 5-day week. The men shall work 8 hours a day, 5 days, and rest on Saturday and Sunday, without reduction, the company says, in the weekly wage. The 8-hour day is a long-standing demand of the American working class. The 5-day week, in its way, is the answer to that demand. Mr. Ford has spoken in the press of the arithmetic of the proposition. The workman with a day at his leisure shall buy the more. automobiles among the items. A workman who has bought a motor car on the installment plan, it may be added, is a workman who cannot easily afford to strike. The Ford Motor Company does not recognize a union of its workers. The service department at the works, under Mr. Bennett, sees to it that no union shall be organized. The 5-day week is granted on terms the company alone shall set. The week's other significance is that of the calendar. 40 years past, this very evening in this city, men were assembled in the Haymarket on Randolph Street to protest the killing, the day before, of striking workers at the McCormick Reaper Works. 3 days earlier still, on the 1st of May, 1886, some 350,000 working men and women across the country had gone out on strike with a single demand. The slogan of the day was 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The Haymarket meeting was peaceable. Mayor Carter Harrison attended a portion of it and found nothing to object to. The crowd had thinned in the rain when a column of 180 policemen marched into the square and ordered the meeting to disperse. As the last speaker was concluding, a bomb was thrown. Who threw it has never been established. In the confusion that followed, the police opened fire. 7 officers and an unknown number of working men were killed. Of the 8 men later put on trial, no evidence was offered that any of them had thrown the bomb or had any knowledge of the man who did. They were tried for their politics, for their speeches, for their writings, for their associations. The prosecutor told the jury that anarchism itself was on trial. The state of Illinois hanged August Spies, Albert Parsons, Adolph Fisher, and George Engel on the 11th of November, 1887. A 5th, Louis Ling, took his own life in the cell. 3 more, Samuel Fielden, Michael Schwab, Oscar Neebe, went to the penitentiary and were pardoned 6 years later by Governor Altgeld of Illinois, who in his pardon message held that the jury had been packed, that the trial had been an outrage, and that the men hanged had been hanged for their opinions. The 8-hour day was paid for at the Haymarket. It was paid for again at Pullman, and in the long campaigns of the United Mine Workers, and in the strikes at Lawrence and at Patterson, and in 100 funerals of which the daily papers kept no record. It was paid for at congresses of the working class in Paris and in Brussels on the 1st of May, the day of the world's labor. The 5-day week of the Ford Motor Company arrives 40 years after the men who first demanded it in this city were hanged for demanding it. The settlement that comes today does not come in their names. From the Mosquito Coast, the cruiser Cleveland of the United States Navy is this day ordered to Bluefields on the eastern littoral of Nicaragua. The region, with its English-speaking Creole population and its American-owned timber and banana enclaves, has these past several days seen the landing of liberal insurgent forces under General Sandoval and Moncada in arms against the conservative government of President Chamorro at Managua. The State Department gives as the reason for the Cleveland's dispatch the protection of American lives and American property. The American property at Bluefields is the property of the Standard Fruit and Steamship Company, of the Bragman's Bluff Lumber Company, and of the banana and timber concessions held under license from successive governments at Managua. The American lives are, in the main, the lives of the men who manage those concessions. The same assurance has been given at Veracruz, at Port-au-Prince, at Santo Domingo. There were, when the Marines came ashore in 1909 in support of an earlier conservative rising, the same lives and the same property requiring the same protection. The Marines did not depart Managua until the year passed. The Cleveland, by the department's calculation, shall arrive at Bluefields on the 6th. We shall hear what follows. From Warsaw, the government of Premier Alexander Skaczynski is, as we go to air, in the course of falling. The cabinet, a coalition of the left-center, has been unable to hold its budget together. The parliamentary parties cannot agree. The Polish currency is in trouble. The premier's own resignation is expected at any hour. Such a fall is, in Polish politics, a routine event. The country has had 14 cabinets since the Constitution of 1921. And the customary response is the formation of the next coalition by Mr. Vitos of the Piast Peasant Party with the Christian Democrats and the right. What is to be noted is the ground on which the present cabinet falls. There is unemployment in the cities. There is bitterness in the countryside. There is discontent among the Polish workers, which no parliamentary arithmetic in Warsaw can address. The crisis comes only days after the May Day clashes in the streets of the Polish capital, in which contingents of socialists and communists fell upon one another while the gendarmes looked on. Several workers were killed. And there is the situation at Sulejówek, the village outside Warsaw, where Marshal Józef Piłsudski has these 4 years lived in retirement. The marshal does not speak in the same. His circle speaks for him in the columns of Courier Poranny and Głos Prawdy. The legionnaire officers of the 1st Brigade who served under him in the war remain his men in their commands. The officers of the Polish army who would be pleased to take advantage of a divided Polish working class are not idle in their barracks. The cabinet shall fall. What follows the fall is the matter to be watched. From Moscow, the organs of the Communist International have called for international solidarity with the British miners. 10 days before the lockout opened the present crisis, the Executive Committee of the International had set down in its own organs a manifesto under the title, Great Events Preparing in Great Britain, a forecast of the conflict now in progress. The Red International of Labor Unions has called upon workers' organizations to refuse to handle the coal that strike-breaking ships may move and to take collections for the miners' families. The Soviet trade unions have, by all accounts, begun those collections. And from Elmhurst in this state, brief word as the broadcast closes. Eugene Debs of Terre Haute, the veteran of American socialist politics, 5 times a candidate for the presidency, a man whose name the working class of this country has known for 30 years, is at the Lindlar Sanitarium in failing health. The years in Atlanta Penitentiary, which the country was told were a punishment for his speech against the war, have left him as such years leave such men. He continues, when his strength permits, to send out the occasional public word. The country has not yet had his last. That has been the day's report. Tribune of the Plebs, signing off. In Britain, the general strike enters its 2nd day. The country remains stopped, and a battle of a different kind has opened for the printing press itself between the Cabinet and the Trades Union Congress. In Warsaw this evening, the resignation of Premier Skrzynski is confirmed. And from Moscow, the chairman of the Communist International calls the British strike the most consequential class confrontation in any imperial country since the war. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 5th of May, 1926. This evening marks the 2nd day of the general strike. The silence of Fleet Street has not improved over the night. So far as we can ascertain, no major industry that was out yesterday has returned to work today. What has emerged in the last 24 hours is a contest for the printing press itself. With Fleet Street silenced by its own compositors, the government has produced its own newspaper. The first number of the British Gazette appeared on the streets of London this morning, edited under the personal direction of Mr. Winston Churchill, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Gazette describes the strike as an act of revolution and a constitutional outrage. The Trades Union Congress has answered with a paper of its own. The British Worker, published from the offices of the Daily Herald, was due upon the streets of London this afternoon. Its publication was held up for some hours by the intervention of the police, the compositors being kept at the type until permission was at last secured for the paper to be released. The workers' line is opposite the Gazette's. The strike, it tells the public, is a wage dispute, fought to defend the miners' standard of living. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has taken personal command of a strike-breaking newspaper. The Cabinet finds it necessary to print and distribute its own propaganda by armed escort. The Metropolitan Police hold up the publication of the trade union paper at the printer's stone. Mr. Churchill has urged still firmer measures. There has been talk in the Cabinet of using the Army to operate trains and lorries, of seizing trade union funds at the bank. Mr. Baldwin, for the moment, has resisted these proposals, preferring the volunteer and the special constable to the soldier. Whether his preference holds will depend on whether the strike weakens of its own accord. On this point, the government's calculation appears to have been wrong. The miners, meanwhile, continue locked out at the pithead. It is worth setting out, in the second day of the strike, what the matter of the miners is. The British coal industry, since the end of the war, has run upon district agreements. The wages of a Yorkshire face worker and the wages of a Welsh face worker negotiated separately, with the owners pleading at every district that the markets will not bear what the men ask. The coal owners have, since the spring, demanded the abolition of those agreements in favor of a single national wage cut and the extension of the working day from 7 hours to 8. On the 30th of April, the government subsidy to the industry, by which the wages of the past 9 months had been maintained, expired by its own terms. On the 1st of May, the coal owners served lockout notices upon 1 million men. The men were to return at the lower wage and the longer day, or stay out. They stayed out. The argument is not new. In 1921, the year of the previous lockout, when the wartime nationalization of the mines was returned to private hands, the same owners broke the miners with the same demand, while the railwaymen and the transport workers, in the event known to British labor as Black Friday, declined to come to the miners' aid. On the 31st of July last year, the same demands brought the country to the same brink, and the Cabinet, finding that the General Council of the Trades Union Congress was prepared to call out the auxiliary trades, retreated, granted the 9-month subsidy, and called the day Red Friday. The Cabinet has spent the 9 months since arranging the volunteer organizations, the food convoys, the wireless announcements, and the special constables that listeners of this station have observed in operation since Monday night. The miners have spent the 9 months waiting for the subsidy to lapse. The General Council of the Trades Union Congress has spent the 9 months hoping the question would not arise. The question has arisen. The miners' position, set down in the words of their secretary, Mr. Arthur Cook, has held since the spring. Not a penny off the pay, not a second on the day. From Warsaw, Premier Skaczynski's resignation is confirmed. Consultations are underway for a new government. From London, Mr. Shapurji Saklatvala, the Member of Parliament for North Battersea, Indian-born, the only avowed communist in the Imperial House of Commons, is held in custody following his arrest after the May Day rally at Hyde Park. The charge is conduct conducive to a breach of the peace. The case will be heard at Bow Street tomorrow. From Moscow this morning, Gregory Zinoviev, chairman of the Communist International, has published an article on the British strike, describing it as the most serious class confrontation in any imperial country since the war. The British workers have placed themselves, by their action, in the front rank of the world's revolutionary forces. Whether their leadership has done so is another question. The Executive Committee of the International has, in the same hour, issued from Moscow its own institutional manifesto upon the British events, addressed not to one party, but to the working class of every country. The text calls upon communists and labor militants alike to make of the British struggle a working class cause across every border the strike's news can cross. The Soviet trade unions have called upon every Soviet workman to give up a quarter day's wages to the relief of the locked-out British miner, and the first collections are already underway in Moscow and Leningrad. From the Soviet ports come reports that dockmen have voted to refuse any cargo bound for Britain that bears the marks of strikebreaking. In New York City, the strike of the fur workers continues into its 12th week. Some 12,000 workers, in the great majority Jewish, walked out of the shops on the 16th of February under the leadership of the Joint Board of the Furriers Union and its strike chairman, Mr. Ben Gold. Their demands are the 40-hour week, equal division of work in the slack season, and an end to the contract system. They have faced the clubs of the city police, the injunctions of the courts, hired gangsters in the employ of the manufacturers, and the editorial chorus that any strike led by communists is a strike against America itself. The strike continues. In Passaic, New Jersey, the textile strike is now in its 15th week. Some 16,000 workers, Polish, Hungarian, Italian, Slovak, in the great majority recent immigrants, and in a great many cases women, remain out at the mills. The strike is conducted by the United Front Committee under the leadership of Mr. Albert Weisbord. Relief funds are now arriving from working-class organizations across the country. It is the largest industrial action underway in the United States at this hour. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Germany, the Reichstag has this day declined to expropriate the property of the former ruling houses, and the matter shall now go to the people themselves by referendum next month. In London, the general strike enters its third day, and Mr. Shapurji Saklatvala, Indian-born communist member of parliament, has been sentenced at Bow Street to 2 months' imprisonment. And in this country, the Trade Union Educational League calls upon American labor to make common cause with the locked-out British miner. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Thursday, the 6th of May, 1926. The German Reichstag has today declined by a vote of the right and center to enact the law that 12.5 million Germans had set their hands to demanding. The law that would have stripped from the former kings, princes, dukes, and grand dukes the wealth they have continued to draw from the German nation since the day they were turned off their thrones. In November 1918, the German Revolution put an end to the German monarchies. The Hohenzollern in Berlin, the Wittelsbach in Munich, the houses of Saxony and Hesse, the Saxe-Coburg, all were turned out of their palaces by the workers and soldiers of Germany in revolt. Of their thrones, the princes were dispossessed. Of their estates, their forests, their palaces, their stocks, their bonds, and their bank accounts, they were not. The new republic, which the workers had brought into being, settled itself upon the throne the workers had emptied, and proceeded then to negotiate with the very men whose throne it had been a compensation for the property that was no longer entirely theirs. That negotiation has gone forward these 8 years. The prince's lawyers have grown rich upon it. The state governments have signed away to the deposed houses sums of public money that would shame a medieval bishop. Forests and country seats and city palaces have been settled upon men who have no claim to them whatsoever. In the autumn of last year, the working class of Germany had at last had enough. The Communist Party of Germany proposed a popular initiative for the full expropriation of the former prince's wealth without compensation. The Social Democratic Party, after some weeks of hesitation, joined the campaign. 12.5 million Germans put their names to the petition, more than enough to compel the Reichstag to take up the question. That question was put to the vote in Berlin today. It did not pass. The Communists and the Social Democrats voted in favor. The German Nationalists, the People's Party, and the Center Party voted against. The Republic, faced with the choice between its working class and its princes, has chosen its princes. By the law that governs popular initiatives in Germany, the rejection does not bury the proposal. It passes the question instead to a popular referendum, which has now been set for the 20th of June. The German electorate will then be asked whether the property of the former ruling houses is to be returned to the German people. The press of the right in Berlin and Munich is already in full cry against expropriation. We shall keep listeners informed of the campaign as it develops. To Britain, where the general strike is now in its third day, the Cabinet's mood has lifted somewhat. A handful of bus routes have been put back into operation by volunteer drivers. Government supply arrangements have begun moving food from the London depots under police protection. The British Gazette has produced a second number, larger than the first, in which Mr. Churchill assures the public that the strike is nearing collapse. It is not nearing collapse. The men who walked out on Monday night are still out. The miners are still locked out. The trains are still in their sheds. The London Underground is still dark. What has been gained is a handful of routes manned by university students and a great deal of newsprint from a committee of editors working out of the Morning Post offices. In a London courtroom this morning at Bow Street Police Court, Mr. Shapoji Saklatvala, the Member of Parliament for North Battersea, was sentenced to 2 months' imprisonment for the speech he made at Hyde Park on May Day. The magistrate offered Mr. Saklatvala the alternative of being bound over to keep the peace. Mr. Saklatvala declined. He preferred, he told the court, the prison to the bond. The only avowed communist in the Imperial House of Commons has been sent to prison in the first week of a national strike for words spoken at a public rally. From Warsaw, the consultations of these past days have begun to settle. Of the names put forward to assemble the next coalition, that of Mr. Vincenti Vitos of the Peasant Party is the one most often heard. The parties of the parliamentary right and center together hold a slim majority, but they are united upon almost nothing save their distaste for the working class parties on their left. A government built upon that foundation will not stand long. The British strike has, in these past 2 days, become the property of the working class beyond Britain. The reports reaching us through the columns of the working class press on the continent place the strike in a Europe that is not standing still alongside it. From Vienna comes a declaration of solidarity addressed to the British miner from the workers of the Warchalovsky firm, the Austrian motor and aviation works, whose name has been on the lips of every striker in the Habsburg successor states since the Vienna metalworkers fought their long battle there 4 years past. From Norway, the columns of the Comintern's organ report a lockout still in progress against 20,000 Norwegian workmen, declared by the Norwegian Employers Federation a fortnight before the British coal owners served their own notices. The miners of 2 countries on opposite shores of the North Sea now stand locked out by the same calculation. From Budapest, a march of locked-out Hungarian miners is reported moving by foot upon the Hungarian capital, with demands kin to those of the men in the South Wales valleys, that wages already at the floor shall not be cut further to the satisfaction of the coal owner. These are not stories the wires of Reuters and the Associated Press have carried in any detail. They are carried in this country by the labor press, the foreign language papers of the immigrant working class, and the columns of the Communist International. They are reported here because they are the present condition of the world's labor, the field upon which the British struggle has fallen. In this country today, the Trade Union Educational League, the militant labor organization led by Mr. William Z. Foster, has issued an appeal to American workers. The appeal calls upon every American workman to refuse the handling of any cargo on any dock in any rail yard that bears the marks of strikebreaking against the British miner. It calls upon every union local to take up immediate collections for the relief of the locked-out miners' families. It calls upon every American worker to press upon those in the maritime trades the simple proposition that no man may, in good conscience, load coal or carry cargo in the service of the British coal owners while the British miner stands locked out at the pit gate. The appeal is being carried today through the daily worker of this city and through the wider militant labor press of the country, alongside the call already issued by the Communist International from Moscow. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Britain, the general strike enters its 4th day. Sir Herbert Samuel has placed before the General Council of the Trades Union Congress a formula for settlement, and the locked-out miners have signaled that they cannot accept it. From the Mosquito Coast comes word that the United States Marines have landed at Bluefields in the name of the protection of American property. And from the great industrial cities of this country, the call to American labor to come to the aid of the locked-out British miner is taken up, while the executive officers of the American Federation of Labor remain this evening silent upon the matter. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 7th of May, 1926. This evening marks the 4th day of the general strike. The British nation is still stopped, but the politics of the dispute have today taken their first decisive turn. Sir Herbert Samuel, the Liberal politician who chaired the Royal Commission on the Coal Industry, has today placed a formula for settlement before the negotiating committee of the Trades Union Congress. Sir Herbert is at present a private citizen. The Cabinet, by every careful indication, has neither asked him to mediate nor offered to be bound by anything he proposes. The terms are these. The miners are to accept, in principle, wage reductions. A new National Wages Board is to be constituted. The reorganization of the coal industry is to proceed alongside upon some timetable the document is not specific about. The subsidy is not to be restored. The lockout notices are to stand. The General Council looks upon the formula with no small interest. Among certain of its members, those who never desired the strike to begin with and who fear what they call the political consequences of its continuation, the Samuel terms are spoken of in tones of considerable relief. The position of the Miners' Federation has been known from the first hour of the lockout and is unchanged this evening. No settlement involving wage reductions can be accepted by men who were locked out for refusing those very reductions. Mr. A.J. Cook, the miners' secretary, has stated the position in language that has by now passed into the vocabulary of every coal field in the country. Not a penny off the pay, not a second on the day. The miners did not lock themselves out. The miners did not call the general strike. To accept the Samuel terms would be to accept the very cuts in resistance to which the working class of Britain has now downed tools for 4 days running. The General Council called this strike in support of the miners. The miners are now pressed to consider terms which the General Council itself, 4 days ago, would not have offered. The fault line that has been visible since the strike began between the central apparatus, which prefers settlement, and the men at the pit head who require defense, has today opened wide enough to see through. The country, meanwhile, remains stopped. Volunteer transport increases by the day. The Cabinet's tone hardens. The miners hold. From the Mosquito Coast, that is, the Caribbean shore of the Republic of Nicaragua, the United States Marines have today come ashore at the port of Bluefields. The official explanation issued by the State Department is that the lives and property of American citizens require protection in this hour of disorder, and that the Marines shall remain ashore only until such order is restored. The pattern is known well enough to anyone who has watched the Caribbean these 20 years past. Liberal insurgent forces landed 5 days ago, opening hostilities against the conservative government. Within 48 hours of that landing, the United States cruiser was upon her way. Within 5 days of that landing, the United States Marines are upon Nicaraguan soil. The American property thus protected includes the lumber and the fruit concessions of certain houses. To the eastern Mediterranean, reports from Damascus and the agricultural districts of the Ghouta speak of further French punitive action. The Druze revolt of last summer has not been put down. It has spread beyond the Druze. It has become a Syrian revolt. The French answer has been to bombard the quarters of Damascus from which the resistance is supposed to come, and to issue notices to the villages of the Ghouta informing them that they may face shelling without further warning for the offense of harboring rebels or failing to pay the fines levied upon them. The mandate of the French Republic over Syria is being enforced by the artillery and the aeroplane against a civilian population. The French and Spanish forces operating against the Republic of the Rif under the leadership of Mr. Abdel Krim have today resumed their air pressure upon Rif positions in northern Morocco. The Rif Republic, proclaimed some years ago, has been fighting 2 of the great colonial powers since. The combined armies of the Third French Republic and the Spanish monarchy have not yet succeeded in subduing it. From Moscow, the reports received this evening carry the news that Soviet trade union solidarity with the locked-out British miner has now reached the docks. At Leningrad, the dock workers have refused to load or to unload the cargoes of the British steamers presently in the harbor. These vessels comprising, by the report of the Soviet trade unions, the greater part of foreign shipping in Soviet ports this week. Refusals on the same lines are reported from the Black Sea port of Odessa and from the harbors of the Sea of Azov. The Central Council of the Soviet trade unions sets the number of dock workers presently engaged in the refusal at some 8,000 men. The quarter-day collections taken up at the close of last week are reported as continuing to swell. Closer to home, to the question of what American labor is doing and what American labor is not doing in the matter of the British strike, now in its 7th day from the lockout and its 4th from the general stoppage. The appeal issued this week by the Trade Union Educational League has been carried forward by the militant labor of this country with such means as the militant labor of this country possesses. Meetings in support of the British miner have been reported in this city, in New York, in Pittsburgh, in Detroit, and in the lesser industrial towns of the East and the Middle West. Collections are reported underway in the needle trades locals of the great cities, in certain miners' lodges of the bituminous fields, and in cooperative associations and fraternal lodges of the foreign-born, Finnish, Jewish, Slavic, Italian, for whom the British dispute is not in any sense a foreign matter. The relief shall move through the channels already established by the international labor movement. The American Federation of Labor, under its president, Mr. William Green, has, in the 11 days since the British coal owners locked out the miner, and in the 4 days since the British workers answered with the greatest stoppage of trade in the modern history of any imperial country, issued no call to the American working class. It has issued no appeal for solidarity. It has issued no instruction to its affiliated internationals that they shall raise collections. It has issued no condemnation of any cargo bearing the marks of strikebreaking. The Federation has not condemned the British government. It has not endorsed the British strike. It has, in the matter of the most consequential labor confrontation in the English-speaking world in our lifetime, found nothing in particular to say. The militant labor of America has heard from London. The militant labor of America has answered. The Federation, this evening, is still considering. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Britain, the general strike enters its 7th day. Reports from London this evening carry word that the courts are being drawn into the dispute. An action in the High Court touching the Seamen's Union, with a question raised whose answer may reach every strike outside the mining industry. In Warsaw, a new cabinet is sworn in this day under Mr. Vincenti Vitos, his 3rd ministry, and a return of the Cheno-Piast coalition. And in France, the Republic, whose forces this evening are at work in Damascus and in the Rif, has become the first nation to ratify the protocol forbidding the use of poison gas in war. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Monday, the 10th of May, 1926. This evening marks the 7th day of the general strike. The British nation, by every cautious estimate, remains stopped. Coal does not move. The trains, but for the limited volunteer service the cabinet parades each morning, do not run. The docks are idle. The British worker continues to appear. The British Gazette continues to insist that the strike is finished, while correspondents in London continue to write that it is not. What is changing this evening is the legal weather. The courts are now being drawn into the dispute. Proceedings touching the National Sailors and Firemen's Union are before the High Court, with the question raised whether men may be called out before the union has held the ballot required by its own rules. Behind that immediate question stands the larger one, whether the general strike enjoys the protection that Parliament granted to trade disputes in the Act of 1906. The argument pressed upon the bench is that the strike is no trade dispute at all within the meaning of that act, that it is, instead, an action directed at the Constitution itself, and that the protections of the Act of 1906, therefore, do not reach it. Should the court so hold, those protections would remain with the men of the mining industry alone. For every other trade that has come out in solidarity, they would be in question. And with them, the funds of the unions themselves, the strike pay, the benefit accounts, the treasuries upon which the families of striking men depend. A judgment is expected within days. The matter is not new in British law. In 1834, 6 agricultural laborers at Tolpuddle in Dorset were sentenced to 7 years' transportation for taking an oath of mutual support. In 1901, the Taff Vale judgment held the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants liable for a Welsh railway company's losses during a strike. That ruling threatened union funds across the country and was answered in 1906 by the Trade Disputes Act, now in question. The question the High Court is asked to settle this week is whether the protections of that act reach a strike of this character. What this would mean for the General Counsel can be set down plainly. The right wing of the Council has, from the first day, held its strongest fear to be the risk of union funds being attached and officers being personally liable. The case now before the court makes that fear concrete. The miners themselves are not the object of the proceeding, and their dispute would stand apart. The practical effect, should the court hold as the owner's men expect, is that the General Counsel's membership outside the mining industry would be told it can be sued into ruin, while the miners, for whose sake the strike was called, stand where they began. The bridge which Sir Herbert Samuel offered the Council last Friday has this week been widened by the approach of the law. To Warsaw. This day, a new government of Poland has been sworn in. Mr. Wincenty Witos, leader of the Piast Peasant Party, is Prime Minister. His cabinet, a coalition of his own peasant faction, of the Christian Democratic deputies under Mr. Korfanty, and of the National Democratic Right, is the Channel Piast bloc. It is Mr. Witos's third ministry, and it restores to office the political arrangement which Marshal Piłsudski and his supporters have long held responsible for the paralysis of the Republic. The conservative press of the continent has greeted the new cabinet with some relief. The parliamentary system, the editorial line runs, has produced a government. It is a view not universally held in Warsaw. Around Mr. Józef Piłsudski at Sulejovic, the rotation of these coalitions has long been described as the disease the Marshal was once summoned to cure. From journals close to his camp has come language these past days to the effect that the parliamentary mode has had its trial, and that the question of leadership shall now fall to those prepared to take it up. The Marshal's military supporters are, by every report, not idle this week. London this evening has the law closing upon the protections of British labor. Warsaw this evening has produced a cabinet which depends by every visible measure on the forbearance of those who would prefer it gone. The week ahead will test in both capitals the same proposition, that the parliamentary order built after the war can still, by ordinary means, manage the conflicts which the war set in motion. From the Northumberland coal field in the early hours of this morning, a section of railway track on the East Coast Main Line near the village of Cramlington was taken up. The Flying Scotsman, the Edinburgh Express running south, was thereby brought to a derailment. The train was moving at low speed. Casualties have been described as few. First reports attribute the act to men from the locked-out coal field in the immediate district. The miners of Northumberland have been out since the 1st of May by lockout notices served by the owners. From France. The French Republic has today become the first state to ratify the protocol of the 17th of June, 1925, which forbids in war the use of asphyxiating and poisonous gases and of bacteriological methods. In the same week, French forces are at work in 2 places. In Damascus, French artillery has these past days returned to bombardment of the Druze and Syrian quarters. The campaign is now in its 10th month. It opened last summer in the Jebel Druze, when the Druze under Sultan al-Atrash rose against the French Mandate Authority, against new taxes, against forced labor, against a French administration that had answered Drew's petitions with the deportation of their notables. The revolt spread to the orchards of the Ghouta and into Damascus itself. The French answer has been bombardment by field gun and by aeroplane. The shells falling upon the Maidan and upon Al-Harika are high explosive. They are not, in the language of the protocol, gas. In Morocco, French and Spanish forces are completing the campaign against the Republic of Abd el-Krim, the Rifian confederation that proclaimed its independence of Spanish colonial rule 5 years past, and that in 1925 carried the war into the French zone and shook the Republic's position in North Africa. The war has run upon mountain artillery, infantry levies, air attack, and on the Spanish side especially, chemical weapons used against Rifian villages. The protocol's terms have been negotiated in the main against the use between European armies of weapons developed in Europe. The wars now being fought are not those wars. From Moscow, the Soviet government's view of the matter has been on the record for some time. The columns of the working class press have carried these past weeks the standing line of Foreign Commissar Chicherin, that the disarmament conferences of the League of Nations, conducted from a Geneva that has not seen fit to admit the Soviet Union, are an arrangement among the imperial powers to govern the use of weapons among themselves, and to govern not at all the use of those weapons against the peoples whom the imperial powers have set themselves to subdue. The Soviet position takes no satisfaction from today's ratification. The Soviet position is that a protocol ratified in one hand by states whose other hand is at this hour at the Rif and at Damascus does not amount to the prohibition of poison gas. It amounts to the prohibition of poison gas where Europeans might use it on Europeans. That is the line of the Soviet press. From Spitsbergen, the reports received over the past day carry the news that Commander Richard Byrd of the United States Navy, with his pilot, Chief Aviation Pilot Floyd Bennett, has yesterday flown northward from the airfield at Kings Bay aboard the Fokker tri-motor monoplane Josephine Ford, the machine provided to the expedition by Mr. Edsel Ford of the motor company of his name, and has returned to the same field some 15 hours and 3/4 later, claiming to have passed over the geographical North Pole. The claim was placed before the press at Spitsbergen by Commander Byrd himself upon the testimony of his own navigational instruments. The flight covered, by his own report, a circuit of some 1,500 miles in the time stated. The matter has not been received without question, even at Spitsbergen. The expedition of the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, the Italian aviator Umberto Nobile, and the American Lincoln Ellsworth, which lies at the same harbor preparing the airship Norge for the same northward flight, has greeted Commander Byrd with embraces and a Norwegian playing of the American anthem. But other navigators present at Kings Bay are reported by Norwegian and American correspondents both to be working their figures on the distance and the time and the wind, and to be arriving at a number that is not the one Commander Byrd has carried back. The question will be carried forward. What is not in doubt is that an aeroplane has this week attempted the polar circuit by the air and has returned alive. In Passaic, New Jersey, the textile strike, begun on the 25th of January, has entered its 16th week. Some 15,000 workers, Polish, Hungarian, Italian, Slovak, in the majority recent immigrants, and in great number women, remain out at the mills. The strike is conducted by the United Front Committee under the leadership of Mr. Albert Weisbord and continues to face the same arithmetic of January, the police clubs of New Jersey, the injunctions of the Passaic courts, and the editorial position of the local press that the matter is a Bolshevik provocation rather than a wage strike. The cold of January has gone. The hunger has not. The United States Senate is to receive in the coming weeks a petition for hearings upon the strike. The date will be reported when it is fixed. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In London this evening, the High Court has pronounced the general strike unlawful. The protection Parliament granted to trade disputes 20 years past, the bench has held, does not reach it, and the treasuries of the unions stand within the reach of the law. In Warsaw, the third government in 2 months has taken office, and taken it friendless. At Sulejovec, the circle about Marshal Piłsudski lets it be known that the parliamentary experiment has had its trial. And in Massachusetts, the highest court of the Commonwealth prepares to give its answer in the matter of 2 Italian workmen, Sacco and Vanzetti. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Tuesday, the 11th of May, 1926. This evening marks the 8th day of the general strike. The stoppage holds. What has moved today has moved not in the street, but in the courts. This morning, in the action brought before the Chancery Division touching the National Sailors and Firemen's Union, Mr. Justice Asbury has given judgment. He has granted the injunction sought against the union's officers, and he has held, in granting it, that the general strike is no trade dispute within the meaning of the Trade Disputes Act of 1906. That it is, save in the coal trade itself, an unlawful act, and that the protection the Act of 1906 extends to lawful trade disputes does not reach it. The meaning of the judgment can be set down plainly. The miners' own lockout, the judge has allowed, stands on its own ground, but for every other trade that has come out in sympathy, the railwaymen, the dockers, the transport men, the printers, the ruling is that they enjoy no protection at law, that their officers may be sued, and that the funds of their unions, the strike pay and the benefit accounts upon which the families of striking men depend, may be attached. What was, a week ago, a question put before the bench is now a judgment upon the books. The right wing of the General Council has held from the first day of the strike that its gravest danger was this very thing, that the unions might be ruined at law for an action their own leaders had called. That danger is no longer a forecast. And so this evening, the Council is reported to be in something other than a fighting posture. We are given to understand that its committees have been in quiet communication with Sir Herbert Samuel, whose formula the miners declined on Friday last. That the question now weighed in the offices at Eccleston Square is no longer how the strike might be widened, but how it might be brought to a close, and that the inclination of the leadership runs toward a settlement, with or without the consent of the men for whom the strike was called. No decision has been announced. The direction of the movement is not difficult to read. It is worth marking where each party stands tonight. The miners, who began the dispute, and for whose sake the sympathy strike was called, are not party to the case the court has decided, and would not be touched by it. The men in the street remain out. The picket lines hold. The women's auxiliaries and the trades councils continue the work of relief. What has been shaken this week is not the strike. It is the nerve of the men who direct it. To Warsaw. The cabinet of Mr. Vincenti Bittos, sworn into office but yesterday, governs this evening over a country that has given it neither thanks nor confidence. To understand why a new Polish government is greeted not with relief, but with the expectation of its fall, one must look behind the present week. Poland was reconstituted 8 years ago after more than a century of partition, and has not in those 8 years found a settled government. In 1923, the inflation destroyed the savings and the pensions of the middle classes at a stroke. The currency reform that followed under Mr. Grabski steadied the new zloty, but steadied it upon the backs of those least able to bear the cost. The crisis of last year brought strikes, unemployment, and the collapse of what confidence remained in government by coalition. In 8 years, Poland has had 14 governments. Each has fallen to the same arithmetic: peasant, nationalist, clerical, and socialist factions forming and breaking coalitions while the want beneath them deepened. Into that record steps the cabinet of Mr. Bittos, the same coalition of Peasant Party, Christian Democrats, and the National Democratic Right. Several of the same men in the same offices. Broadly, the arrangement that has governed through the worst of it. The conservative press of the continent has greeted it with relief. The parliamentary system, the editorial line runs, has produced a government. It is not the view held at Sulejovec. There, the circle about Marshal Piłsudski reads the new cabinet as the final proof of its case, that the parliamentary mode can produce nothing but its own repetition, and that the question of who shall govern must now fall to those prepared to take it up. The Marshal's military supporters, by every report, grow bolder by the day. From China, within the Kuomintang, the nationalist party that governs from Canton, and within which the Chinese communists have until now worked as members, the military authority of General Chiang Kai-shek continues to gather to itself the powers once shared more widely. Measures are in preparation, we are given to understand, to limit the part the communists may take in the party's committees, and to require the registration of their membership. The United Front of Nationalists and Communists, formed under the late Sun Yat-sen with the Council of Moscow, holds yet in form. Whether it holds in substance is the question being settled quietly this spring, before the northern campaign that all parties expect of the summer. Closer to home, in Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court of the Commonwealth is expected to hand down its decision shortly upon the motions for a new trial in the case of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, the two Italian workmen, anarchists by conviction, held these 6 years for a killing at South Braintree, upon evidence the labor and liberal movements of two continents have called a frame-up. New matter has come before the court since the conviction. Whether the court will weigh it, the court has not yet said. Its word is awaited. As this broadcast goes to air, the reports reaching us from Warsaw have changed in their character. Through the evening, units of the garrison in and about the capital are said to have left their barracks and taken up positions in the streets, and several regiments are reported to have declared for Marshal Piłsudski. The government, for its part, is said to have called upon other formations to stand in its defense. What was this morning a quarrel of newspapers and coalitions has become by the small hours a question of which soldiers will obey which orders. We report it as it reaches us, and with the caution that the first reports of such a night are seldom the whole of it. By tomorrow's broadcast, the matter may be decided. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In London, after 9 days, the general strike is over. The Trade Union Congress has gone to Downing Street and ended the greatest stoppage in the history of these islands, and has ended it with nothing in hand. The miners, for whom the strike was called, remain locked out. In Warsaw, the argument that began in the newspapers has been carried into the streets with rifles. Marshal Piłsudski's forces hold the bridges of the Vistula. By this evening, Poles are firing upon Poles. And from Massachusetts, the highest court of the Commonwealth has refused a new trial to Sacco and Vanzetti. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 12th of May, 1926. It is over. At 20 minutes past noon today, a deputation of the General Council of the Trades Union Congress was received at number 10 Downing Street by the Prime Minister. And a little after 1 o'clock, the word was given out. The general strike is called off. And we report the fact first and the terms after, because the terms are the heart of the matter. The General Council went to Downing Street seeking terms, the Samuel formula honored, and some protection for the men who would return. And it secured neither in any form that binds. It carried with it the memorandum drawn up by Sir Herbert Samuel, the bridging paper proposing the lines upon which the coal dispute might be settled, and it appears to have treated that paper as sufficient ground to call the men back. But the Samuel Memorandum binds no one. It is not the government's paper. The government has given no undertaking to stand behind it, and Sir Herbert drew it up in no official capacity. The Council has ended the strike upon a document the Cabinet is under no obligation to honor, and upon the one question that mattered most to the men who would return, the question of whether they would be taken back at all, the Council secured nothing. There is no guarantee against victimization. The government's position was put plainly. It has no power, ministers said, to compel an employer to take back every man who had gone out. The strike is therefore ended without protection for the striker, the railwayman, the docker, the printer, the transport man who answered the call 9 days ago, returns to his employer's gate tomorrow with no assurance that his place is still his, and with the knowledge, fresh from the court of yesterday, that his union may be sued for having called him out at all. The miners are not party to this settlement because there is no settlement. They were not consulted. The Miners' Federation had already refused the Samuel terms last Friday, and its refusal stands. The lockout that began on the 1st of May continues this evening exactly as it began. What has ended today is not the miners' dispute. What has ended is the help. 9 days ago, 1.5 million workers left their tools in support of the locked-out miner. Tonight, the miner is locked out still, and the 1.5 million are called back to work, back to whatever terms their employers now choose to set, with their unions exposed at law and their leaders having secured in 9 days no single guarantee for any man among them. The General Council has called this the close of the strike. There is another word for the withdrawal of support from men still under attack, and the British coal fields will not be slow to find it. It has happened before, and the miners know it best of all. 5 years ago, on the day British labor remembers as Black Friday, the railwaymen and the transport workers withdrew at the brink and left the miners to fight alone. This time, the auxiliary trades came out and have now gone back, and the miner stands once more where Black Friday left him, alone at the pithead, with the owner's notice upon it. What the General Council feared from the first hour of the strike was the ruin of the unions at law and the exhaustion of their funds. Yesterday's judgment in the courts made the first fear concrete, and 9 days of stoppage pressed upon the second. And faced with both, the leadership chose the course that constitutional labor leadership has chosen before. It preferred the certain survival of its institutions to the uncertain victory of its members. Whether the institutions it saved will be thanked for it by the men it sent back is a question the coming weeks will answer. In Poland, the rifles have entered the argument. We reported last evening that the garrisons about Warsaw were stirring and that several regiments had declared for Marshal Piłsudski. By the small hours, the demonstration had become a march, and through the morning, troops loyal to the Marshal moved upon the capital from their stations to the east and south, with Piłsudski himself on the road to Warsaw by early afternoon. The decisive ground was the river. The city of Warsaw sits upon the Vistula, and the Vistula is crossed by bridges, and whoever holds the bridges holds the approaches to the government quarter. And by the afternoon, detachments acting on the Marshal's orders had occupied the chief of them, the Poniatowski Bridge and the Kerbech Bridge, against government troops drawn up to deny them, and the two forces stood upon the river with the city behind them. Late in the afternoon, between roughly 4 and 5 o'clock, the Marshal met the President of the Republic upon the Poniatowski Bridge, the soldier who made the state and the President who embodied its constitution, facing one another upon a bridge over the Vistula with their troops behind them. And Piłsudski demanded the dismissal of the cabinet of Mr. Witos, and President Wojciechowski demanded that the Marshal return to legality and order his men to lay down their arms. Neither yielded. The President withdrew. The matter passed from words to arms. The first shots came soon after, near the river crossings. By the evening, the fighting was general across the capital. Poles are firing upon Poles in the streets of Warsaw this night, and the outcome is not yet decided. It is worth saying clearly what this rising is and what it is not, for the conservative press of the continent has already begun to describe it as a restoration of order against the chaos of Parliament. The cabinet Piłsudski has marched against is no government of the left. It is the Piast coalition, the peasant party of Mr. Vitos, the Christian Democrats, and the National Democratic Right, sworn in but 2 days ago. The Marshal has risen against a government of the center and right. In the name of a nation, he says the Parliament has failed. What he proposes to put in its place, he has not said. He has spoken of cleansing, of the moral renewal of the state, of an end to the rule of party bargaining, but he has not spoken of a program. And the labor movement of Poland has this day thrown its weight to the Marshal. The Polish Socialist Party has instructed its people to support Piłsudski's troops, and tomorrow the question of a general strike will be before the Polish unions, and the railwaymen are already weighing whether to let the government's reinforcements through. The workers of Poland are lending their strength to a soldier's rising against a government of the right, in the belief that what stands on the other side of it is better than what stands now. Whether that belief will be honored by the Marshal once the Marshal has won is the question that will run through everything we report from Poland in the weeks to come. We will only observe this evening that armies which are carried to power on the shoulders of working men have not, in the general run of history, remembered the favor long. From Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court of the Commonwealth has handed down its decision in the matter of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, and the motions for a new trial are denied. The conviction stands. The two men, Italian immigrants, anarchists, a shoemaker and a fish peddler, have been held 6 years now for the murder of a paymaster and a guard at South Braintree, upon evidence that the labor and liberal movements of 2 continents have called insufficient to hang a dog. The trial of 1921, before Judge Webster Thayer, has been called a trial of the men's politics and their foreign birth, rather than of the crime charged, and the motions the court has now refused were built upon matter that has come to light since the verdict. The court has declined to disturb it. The case does not end here. The law affords further steps, and they will be taken. And we report tonight only that the highest court of Massachusetts has had the opportunity to order a new trial and has declined it, and that the cause of Sacco and Vanzetti, which was already a cause across the world's labor movement, will not be made smaller by the decision. From Spitsbergen and from the top of the world, we carried in recent evenings the claim of Commander Byrd of the United States Navy to have flown over the North Pole, and the doubts of certain navigators at Kings Bay who worked his figures and were not satisfied. This evening, we are able to report what is not in dispute. In the small hours of this morning, the airship Norge, bearing the Norwegian Amundsen, the Italian Nobile, and the American Ellsworth, and setting out from that same harbor at Kings Bay, passed over the geographical North Pole and did not turn back, but held her course onward across the polar sea toward Alaska. The 3 men dropped the flags of their 3 nations upon the ice and flew on. Whatever may in the end be said of the commander's claim, the airship's crossing stands. Men have passed over the pole and gone beyond it. We note, without drawing the moral too sharply, that the feat was the work of 3 nations' men in one craft, and that it was done in the same week in which the great powers of Europe were at one another's throats, from the coal fields of England to the bridges of Warsaw. The ice, at least, was crossed in company. From Germany, briefly, the cabinet of Chancellor Luther has fallen, brought down in the quarrel over the flag decree. Germany this week is without a government, as Poland fights for one, and Britain returns to work under none of its choosing. The parliamentary order of post-war Europe shows the strain, this May from London to Warsaw to Berlin. The latest cables from Warsaw, as we go to air, carry no resolution. The fighting continues in the streets about the river. The government has not fallen. The marshal has not prevailed. Both sides are reported to be awaiting the morning and the reinforcements the morning may bring. We shall report tomorrow what the night has decided. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Britain, the day after, the men go back to work and find at a good many gates that the terms of yesterday are no longer the terms on offer. Where there is no guarantee against victimization, the employer writes the guarantee himself. In Poland, the fighting in Warsaw has entered its second day. The churchmen and the parliament have tried to make a peace between the marshal and the president and have failed. The guns have the floor. And the miners of Britain remain locked out as they were on the 1st of May, as they will be tomorrow. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day, given whole. Thursday, the 13th of May, 1926. The general strike was called off yesterday afternoon. This morning, the men went back, or tried to. It has not been the clean resumption the newspapers promised. In some trades and some towns, the return was orderly enough. The trams ran, the trains moved, the presses turned. In others, the men arrived at the gate to find that their employers had read yesterday's settlement for precisely what it was, a return without terms, and therefore a return upon whatever terms the employer cared to set. Some found their old wages no longer offered, and a lower wage in their place. Some found their union no longer recognized where it had been recognized before. Some found themselves not wanted back at all. This is the meaning, made plain within a single day, of the guarantee the General Council did not secure. There was no protection against victimization in the settlement because there was no settlement, and so the victimization has begun. In Manchester this day, some 25,000 railwaymen have stayed out, not in continuation of the general strike, which is over, but in refusal of the worst terms now put to them. And the dockers of that city have stood out beside them. What was called off yesterday in London has, in places, simply refused to die because the men will not crawl back through a lower door than the one they walked out of. The government's posture in all this is worth marking. Having accepted the strike's end as unconditional, having bound itself to nothing, neither to Sir Herbert Samuel's paper nor to any protection for the returning man, the Prime Minister now finds that the employer's appetite for revenge threatens to light the fire again. Mr. Baldwin has let it be understood that he would not wish to see the settlement wrecked by a general persecution of the men. But wishing is the whole of it. He has taken no power to compel an employer to take a man back, and he has said as much. The government will appeal to the employer's good sense. It will not constrain their bad. And beneath all of it, unchanged, lies the fact the whole 9 days were meant to address. The miners are still locked out. The lockout that began on the 1st of May stands tonight in its 13th day, and the men who came out in their support have gone back, some to their old places, some to worse, some to none, while the miners themselves have gained nothing and conceded nothing, and remain exactly where they began, at the pithead, under the owner's notice. The auxiliary trades have had their 9 days. The miners have the months ahead. In Warsaw, the rising is into its second day, and it is not yet decided. We reported last evening that the fighting had become general across the capital. Through the night and into today, it continued. The forces of Marshal Piłsudski hold the eastern approaches and the river crossings. The government, with President Wojciechowski and the cabinet of Mr. Witos, holds the government quarter and has called up what loyal formations it can reach. Between them lies the city, and the people of Warsaw have spent a second day under fire in their own streets. There was an attempt at peace today, and it came to nothing. The Archbishop of Warsaw, Cardinal Kakowski, and the Marshal of the same, Mr. Rataj, sought to mediate between the two sides. The attempt failed, and it failed upon the hard rock of the thing itself. The President would not dismiss the government while the Marshal stood in arms against the state. The Marshal would not lay down his arms while that government remained. Each demanded of the other the very thing the other had risen to prevent. There was no formula that could bridge it, because the quarrel was not about terms. It was about who should rule. So the fighting went on, and today it was the government that pressed. Loyal forces counterattacked through the southern districts and took ground, carrying their line forward through the hospital quarter and into the streets beyond. For a part of the day, it might have seemed the government was gaining, but by evening, the deeper balance had begun to tell against it. The citadel of the city is in the hands of the marshal's men. Reinforcements the government counted upon from the provinces have been slow, or have not come, or have come unwilling. The formations summoned from the south and east are doubtful. An army divided against itself is fighting on both sides of these streets, and the larger half, it now appears, is the marshals. And there is a further element in this battle, and it may prove the decisive one. The workers of Poland have entered the fight, and they have entered it on the marshal's side. The Polish Socialist Party, having yesterday called upon its people to support Piłsudski's troops, has today resolved upon a general strike to take effect tomorrow. And the railwaymen, the organized railway workers, in their union tied to the socialists, have today called a strike upon the railways. The meaning of that, in a battle being decided by which reinforcements reach Warsaw and when, is not small. The trains that would carry the government's loyal regiments to the capital run upon track that railwaymen control. A government that cannot move its troops cannot win a battle of movement. We shall see in the next day how much the rails decide. From the far north, a postscript. We carried last evening the crossing of the airship Norge over the North Pole. We are now able to report that the airship has completed her passage. Having crossed the pole and held her course over the frozen sea, the Norge has come down at Teller in Alaska, her transpolar flight accomplished. From Spitsbergen over the pole to the coast of Alaska, the thing is done, and the men are down and safe. Whatever the season's quarrel over who first reached the pole and how, the Norge has flown clean across the top of the world, from one continent to another, and that is not in dispute. From Germany, the Reich remains without a government this day, the cabinet of Chancellor Luther having fallen on Wednesday. The search for a successor goes forward in Berlin, among the same parties and the same arithmetic that have made and unmade German cabinets since the founding of the Republic. We shall report a government when there is one to report. The last cables from Warsaw, as we go to air, do not announce a victory, but they lean toward one. Through this night, the reports say, the marshal's advantage is hardening. The government's expected reinforcements have not arrived in the strength required, and where the railwaymen's strike has taken hold, they may not arrive at all. The President and the Cabinet are said to be considering their position. We do not report a decision, for none has been announced. We report only that the men who held the upper hand at noon do not appear to hold it at midnight, and that the morning may bring the end of it. We shall know tomorrow. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Warsaw, it is over. After 3 days of fighting in the streets of the capital, the government has fallen. President Wojciechowski and the cabinet of Mr. Witos have resigned, and Marshal Piłsudski stands tonight as the master of Poland. In Britain, the strike a week behind it, the labor movement has turned to the bitterest of all its questions. Not what the enemy did, but what its own leaders did. The word being spoken in the coal fields and the union halls is betrayal. And the miners who began it all are locked out still. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 14th of May, 1926. The battle for Warsaw is decided. Marshal Piłsudski has won. And through this third day, the balance that had begun to tip last evening came down. The government's reinforcements did not arrive in the strength it needed. The formations it counted upon were slow or unwilling or held back upon the railways. And by the afternoon, the position of the President and the Cabinet was no longer tenable, so that President Wojciechowski and the government of Mr. Vitos resigned. The Marshal's men hold the Capitol, and the constitutional forms, who shall hold the presidential office, who shall be summoned to form a cabinet, will be settled in the hours ahead by the Marshal of the same, acting in the President's place. Though the substance is settled tonight, the man who marched on Warsaw 3 days ago has the country in his hand. Let us be exact about how he came to have it, because the manner of the victory is the truth of it. Piłsudski did not win by the weight of his regiments alone. The army was divided, and a divided army does not decide a thing so quickly. What decided it was that one side could move and the other could not. And the reason the government could not move its loyal troops to Warsaw is that the men who run the railways would not carry them. The railwaymen's strike, called yesterday, held upon the lines that mattered, at the great junctions in the industrial districts, and the reinforcements that might have saved the government sat upon sidings or never set out. The Polish Socialist Party threw its organized strength behind the rising. Its people raised volunteer companies in the working districts of the capital, and the general strike, it called, gave the Marshal the city's working class at his back. Marshal Piłsudski rode into Warsaw at the head of an army, but he rode in upon rails the workers had cleared for him, and not for the men they fought against. This is worth holding in the mind because of what the Marshal is and what he is not. Józef Piłsudski was once a socialist, a man of the Polish Socialist Party in his fighting youth, a prisoner of the Tsar, a maker of the Polish legions, and the workers who carried him to power this week have long memories of that Piłsudski, and some of them believe they have restored a friend to power. But the Piłsudski who marched this week marched at the head of no workers' movement. He marched in the name of the nation and the army and the cleansing of the state against the corruption of party government, and the men who stood closest to him as he did it were not the men of the left. He has made, as yet, no promises. He has named no program. He has said what he is against with great force, and what he is for, not at all. The working people of Poland have spent their strength to make him master of the country. What he will give them in return for it is the whole of the question now, and it is a question to which tonight he has returned no answer. We will report the answer as it comes. We report tonight only the deed, that a soldier's rising carried over the last mile by the strength of organized labor has overturned a parliamentary government in the heart of Europe, and that the men who provided that strength do not yet know what they have bought with it. In Britain, the guns are silent, and the recriminations have begun. It is 2 days since the General Council called off the strike, and the question that now runs through every union hall and every coal field is not the government's conduct, but the Council's own. The men obeyed the call to come out, 9 days, in the greatest act of solidarity the British working class has ever made, and they have been sent back with nothing. No protection, no guarantee, no gain, and in many cases to worse than they left, while the miners, for whose sake the whole of it was undertaken, stand tonight where they stood on the 1st of May. The movement is asking how this came to be, and the answers being given are not gentle ones. The defense the General Council offers is the one constitutional labor leadership has always offered. It says the strike could not have been won, that the courts had placed the union's funds in peril, that to have fought on would have been to risk the ruin of the whole trade union movement for a battle already lost, that in calling the strike off, it saved the institutions of labor to fight another day. It says, in short, that it was responsible where others would have been reckless. The answer coming back from the left of the movement, and from the communists above all, is blunter. They call it betrayal, and they do not soften the word. The strike, they say, was not lost. It was surrendered. It was solid on the 9th day, as it had been on the 1st. It was the nerve of the leaders that broke, not the strength of the men. The Council feared its own power more than it feared the government, feared what a victory might unleash, feared the men learning what they could do, and chose defeat at its own hands over a victory it could not control. And the proof of the surrender, they say, is the miners, abandoned in the field, while the leadership that called them their comrades went home and called it prudence. What is not in dispute can be set down plainly. 1.5 million workers came out together and went back divided and unprotected. The men who led them secured nothing for them, and the miners who asked for the help and were given it and have now had it withdrawn are exactly where they began. Whatever word one chooses for that, the coal fields have already chosen theirs. From Syria, where the French mandate continues its work by other means than persuasion. The bombardment and the punitive sweeps about Damascus go on, the revolt not yet broken, and the methods of breaking it growing no gentler. We have reported the shelling of the city in recent weeks, and we note tonight that the guns have not fallen silent, and that the price of the mandate continues to be paid by the people of the Ghouta and the quarters of the old city. And from the coal fields of Britain, a single fact to close upon. The Miners' Federation has not moved an inch. It has not accepted the Samuel terms. It did not accept them when the TUC found them tolerable, and it does not accept them now. Its funds are thin, and the trades that stood with it have gone back to work. It has tonight almost nothing, except the one thing it has refused to surrender, which is its refusal. The long fight in the coal fields begins here. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. In Warsaw, it is over. After 3 days of fighting in the streets of the capital, the government has fallen. President Wojciechowski and the cabinet of Mr. Witos have resigned, and Marshal Piłsudski stands tonight as the master of Poland. In Britain, the strike a week behind it, the labor movement has turned to the bitterest of all its questions. Not what the enemy did, but what its own leaders did. The word being spoken in the coal fields and the union halls is betrayal. And the miners who began it all are locked out still. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 14th of May, 1926. The fighting in Warsaw ended 3 days ago. What goes forward now is the reckoning. The counts of the dead are still being gathered, and they are early counts, and they will be revised. The first reports of such a battle seldom hold up whole. What can be set down this evening, with that caution upon it, is that the 3 days of fighting in the streets of the capital cost something more than 200 lives, soldiers and townspeople both, and the townspeople among them in numbers the early lists have not yet agreed upon, and left the better part of 1,000 more in the hospitals of the city wounded. The shells and the rifle fire fell in a capital full of people. A good many of the dead had no part in the quarrel of the marshal and the president. They were merely in the streets of Warsaw in the days when the argument was settled by arms. We mark the figure because of the word now being placed beside it. The marshal supporters have a name for what has been done these 3 days. They call it sanacja, the healing of the state, the cleansing of public life of the corruption of party and the rot of the parliamentary bargain. It is the word that will be carried at the head of the new order, and the conservative press of the continent has already taken it up, the cleansing of Poland. We report the word as its authors use it. As to the order that now takes shape, the marshal has not seated himself at the head of the state. The presidency he has left for others to fill, and the forming of a cabinet has fallen to Mr. Kazimierz Bartel, summoned to the task by the marshal of the same, Mr. Rataj, who has acted in the place of the president who resigned. Where Piłsudski has kept his hand is upon the army, the instrument that carried him to Warsaw, and the instrument, by every report, that he does not mean to lay down. A man may govern a country without sitting in its highest chair if he holds its soldiers, and that, for the present, appears to be the arrangement the marshal prefers. There remains the question this broadcast has put from the first hour of the rising, and it is the question that matters most to the working people who decided it. The railwaymen who would not carry the government's troops, the socialist workers who raised companies in the working districts and struck the city to order. What have they been given for it? The answer, so far as the answer can be read this evening, is nothing yet and nothing promised. The socialist newspaper, Robotnik, the paper of the very party that threw its strength behind the marshal, conceded but 2 days past that Piłsudski had made no concrete promises, and that what the victory was for had never been made plain even to those who won it. The men closest to the marshal now are not the men of the left who carried him. The working people of Poland have spent their strength, and they wait to learn the price of the spending. We will report it as it comes. To Britain and the coal fields. It is 5 days since the general strike was called off, and the shape of what the calling off left behind is now plain. The strike is over. The lockout is not. The miners stand tonight in the 17th day of it, exactly where they stood on the 1st of May, having gained nothing and conceded nothing. What has changed is everything around them. The 1.5 million who came out in their support have gone back to work, many to worse terms than they left, some not taken back at all. And with the auxiliary trades returned to their benches, the owners and the government are free to do the thing the general strike had prevented them doing, to turn the whole weight of the coal owners, the courts, and the state upon a single industry and to wait. A lockout is a slow weapon. It is not fought with batons in the street. It is fought with the empty larder and the lengthening week, and it is won, if it is won, by hunger. That is the campaign upon which the British coal fields now enter, and they enter it alone. Alone, that is, but for 1 quarter. From Moscow this evening, the press of the Communist International carries word that the trade unions of the Soviet Union have voted a further sum for the relief of the locked-out British miners, and that the Soviet mine workers, gathered in their own Congress, have sent their greetings and their collections to the men of the British pits. A telegram, we are given to understand, has passed between them and Mr. Cook of the Miners' Federation. There is a history to this aid worth the setting down. When the Soviet trade unions first offered their help in the early days of the strike, while the stoppage was whole, the General Council of the Trades Union Congress would not take it. It would not have the strike branded with the charge its enemies were already pressing, the charge of Moscow's gold. And so the offer was returned. The miners have made no such refusal. The aid the council would not take, the locked-out miner takes. And so the material help reaching the British coal fields in the 3rd week of the lockout comes not from the leadership that called the men out and sent them back, but from the workers of a state 1,000 miles to the east. From Berlin, briefly, a government at last. The German Republic, which has gone since the middle of last week without a cabinet, the government of Chancellor Luther having fallen in the quarrel over the flag, has, we are given to understand, found its successor. Mr. Marx returns to the chancellorship at the head of a cabinet of the middle parties formed without the nationalists of the right. It is the same arithmetic that has made and unmade German governments since the founding of the Republic, rearranged once more. Whether this arrangement lasts longer than the last is a question Berlin has learned not to ask aloud. And in Passaic, in New Jersey, the strike that is the longest standing of the American labor struggles enters tonight its 17th week. Some 16,000 workers remain out at the woolen mills. Polish, Hungarian, Italian, and Slovak in the main, recent immigrants, and in great number, women. It is worth saying plainly, on a night when the strike has held so long that the holding has become the news, why they came out at all. They came out against a cut in their wages. The mills cut the wage by 1/10 in the autumn last past, the second cut in the space of a year, upon a workforce that was living, before the cut, at the margin of what a family needs to eat. The strike that began in the cold of January is now in the warmth of May, and the things that have been arrayed against it have not changed. The clubs of the New Jersey police, the injunctions of the courts, the eviction notices, and the steady line of the local press that the whole affair is a Bolshevik importation rather than a quarrel about a tenth of a wage. What has changed is only that the strike has lasted long enough that Washington can no longer pretend not to see it. The Senate is to take up the matter of Passaic within the week. The strikers have outlasted the winter. They have not yet outlasted the mills. The strike continues. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Syria, a document, a notice from the French mandatory authorities, set down in the plain language of administration, warns the quarters of Damascus and the villages of the Ghouta that they may be bombarded without further warning for sheltering the rebels or for failing to pay their fines. From Mexico, a quarrel that wears the dress of religion. The government of Mr. Calles and the Catholic Church move toward open rupture. But the interest that has fixed the attention of Washington is not the altar. And from the British coal fields, the third week of the lockout begins, and the relief from abroad keeps the soup kitchens open while the owners wait. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Tuesday, the 18th of May, 1926. We begin tonight not with a battle, but with a document. It comes by way of the American Consular Service in Syria, and it sets down a notice issued by the French mandatory authorities to the people of Damascus and to the villages of the Ghouta, the belt of orchards and farmland that rings the city and has been, through this last year, the country of the revolt. The notice is brief, it is administrative, and it is worth attending to in its own language, because the language is the whole of the thing. It informs the inhabitants that quarters of the city and villages of the countryside may be made subject to coercive measures, including bombardment, and without further warning, should they shelter or assist the rebels, or should they fail to pay the fines that have been levied upon them. Consider that in the flat official phrasing of it, a quarter of a city may be shelled without warning for the non-payment of a fine. That is not the language of war between armies. It is the language of a landlord and a rent book, with the artillery standing in for the bailiff. It is the mandate, the trust, as the League of Nations was pleased to name it, the solemn charge to lead a people toward governing themselves, written down in the form it takes when the people decline the leading. It is worth recalling how France came to hold that trust, and what the Syrians had asked for instead. When the war ended and the Ottoman lands were divided among the victors, the Syrians did not wait to be assigned a guardian. In the spring of 1920, a Congress in Damascus declared the country independent under the Emir Faisal. France answered that declaration in July on the road to Damascus at a pass called Mesaloun, where French guns and aircraft destroyed the new state's small army in a single afternoon, and France took up its mandate over the plain objection of the governed. The Druze of the southern mountains were promised a measure of self-rule within the new order. The promise was not kept. A French governor imposed new taxes, demanded forced labor on the roads, and deported the notables who protested. And so, last summer, the Druze rose under Sultan al-Atrash, and the rising spread north into the Horan, and into the Ghouta, and into the streets of Damascus itself, until what had begun as a mountain grievance had become a revolt against the mandate entire. The French answer to that revolt has leaned ever more heavily on the gun and the aeroplane. In October last, the French command turned its artillery upon Damascus itself. 2 days of shelling that broke whole quarters of one of the oldest living cities on the earth, and left, by the counts that reached the outside world, well over 1,000 of its people dead. The bombardment drew condemnation across the world and cost France its high commissioner, recalled in the embarrassment of it. It did not change the method. The shelling of Damascus was not the excess of one bad general. It was the mandate's way of answering a city that would not consent to it. And the notice that crosses the consul's desk this week is that same method, set down in advance in writing. Next time, it says, there need be no warning at all. So the document holds the whole of it. A people informed that their houses may be broken from the air for the crime of sheltering their own sons, or for the crime of being unable to pay a fine to the power whose aircraft would do the breaking. In Paris, the communiques speak, as they always speak, of order restored and of the burdens of civilization. The notice to the villages of the Ghouta is that same policy, with the courtesies removed. To Mexico, where a quarrel that wears the vestments of religion is, underneath them, a quarrel about something else. The government of President Kaiser has spent this spring enforcing, for the first time with real vigor, the anti-clerical articles written into the Mexican Constitution of 1917. The articles that stripped the Catholic Church of its lands and its schools, denied it legal standing, and penned its priests and its worship within narrow bounds. Foreign clergy have been expelled. Churches have been closed, and the church hierarchy, which through the long years of the Revolution had mostly declined the fight, has begun to organize resistance in the Catholic country districts of the West. The decree that will bring the matter to its head is expected next month. We will report it when it comes. But it is worth marking on this side of the border which part of the Mexican quarrel has fixed the attention of Washington, and it is not the altar. The same Constitution that confined the Church, in its 27th article, declared the oil and the minerals beneath Mexican soil to be the property of the Mexican nation. That article fell upon the American oil companies that had bought their Mexican concessions under the old regime, Doheny's, Sinclair's, Standard's, with the weight of a writ of confiscation. The Secretary of State, Mr. Kellogg, and the American ambassador in Mexico City have spent the better part of a year now treating Mr. Kaiser's oil policy and his quarrel with the church as a single object, the work, as they describe it, of a Bolshevik government upon the southern border. The church's grievance is real. So are the oil fields. And to the British coal fields, where there is this evening little that is new to report, and a very great deal still at stake. The miners are in the third week of their lockout, and its shape has not altered since we last set it down. The trades that came out beside them are back at their benches. The owners and the government have settled in to wait. And the relief that keeps the soup kitchens lit comes in no small part from the collections of working people abroad, from the Soviet Unions above all, whose latest sum the Moscow press reported only days ago. A lockout makes for poor headlines. It is not settled in an afternoon. It is settled in the slow arithmetic of whose larder empties first. And that arithmetic tonight is precisely what the owners are counting upon. We will keep their count. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. French aircraft were over Damascus again today, one day after the Mandate Authority set their warning down in writing that the villages of the Ghouta and the quarters of the city might be fired upon without further notice. The planes came back over the rooftops. In the south of China, the Nationalist Party has placed a single chairman over its councils for the first time since the death of Sun Yat-sen, and the chair has gone to a wealthy patron of the soldier Chiang Kai-shek. In New Jersey, the textile workers of Passaic hold their picket lines into another week, while in Washington, the Senate makes ready 7 days hence to hear them. And across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain are still locked out and still alone. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 19th of May, 1926. The word from Syria this evening is that French aircraft have once more been over Damascus. The cables of these middle days of May do not all agree upon the day. Some place the heaviest fire on the 7th, some upon the 9th, some upon the city in these last hours. What is not in dispute in any account that has reached us is the thing itself, that through the early and the middle weeks of this month, the capital of Syria and the country around it have lain under French guns and French planes. Only yesterday, this program carried the notices the Mandate authorities had put into writing that the villages of the Ghouta and certain quarters of Damascus might be subjected to bombardment without further warning for the sheltering of rebels or for the non-payment of fines. The Ghouta will mean little to listeners who have never seen it, and it is worth a moment. It is the green belt that rings Damascus, a great oasis of orchards and gardens and watered fields fed by the river Barada as it comes down from the mountains and spends itself in the plain. It is the larder of the city, its apricots and its walnuts, its wheat and its vegetables, the country to which the people of Damascus have looked for their bread for as long as there has been a Damascus. It is also the heartland of the revolt. The gardens that feed the city have sheltered and fed the men who have risen against the mandate. The villages among the orchards are the villages the fighters come from. And so it is the gardens and the villages that the notices name, and the gardens and the villages over which the planes now fly. The city has known this before. In the autumn of last year, French shells fell upon Damascus for 2 days together and laid whole quarters in ruin, a bombardment that drew protest in the chancelleries and the newspapers of Europe, and that cost the French commander his post. The revolt it was meant to break was not broken. It began last summer in the mountains of the Jebel Druze under the leadership of Sultan al-Atrash over new taxes and forced labor and the deportation of the notables who protested them. It spread north and west into the Horan, into the Ghouta, into the quarters of the city itself. And near a year on, it has not been put down. The working-class press abroad has not been silent on Syria. In the spring, the Bulletin of the Communist International carried an appeal under the title, "Saved the Lives of 7 Syrian Revolutionaries, the case of men held under French sentence." Damascus and the Ghouta were placed in French keeping by the League of Nations under a mandate whose stated purpose is to make the country ready for its own independence. This is the form that keeping has taken in the month of May. Notices of bombardment, fines laid upon villages, and aircraft over the orchards. From the south of China comes word of a change at the head of the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, that holds the city of Canton and the country around it. Since the death of Sun Yat-sen last year, the party that Sun built has been governed not by one man, but by its central committee, sitting as a body. Today, that committee has resolved to set a single chairman over itself, and the chairmanship has gone to a man named Zhang Renjie, not a soldier and not an orator, but a wealthy financier, and for many years the friend and the backer of Chiang Kai-shek, the general who commands the party's army. For listeners who have not followed the affairs of the Kuomintang, a word on how matters stand. Some 3 years ago, the Nationalist Party reorganized itself with the help of advisors sent from Moscow, the chief of them a man known as Borodin. And with Soviet arms and Soviet counsel, it built a military academy at Whampoa near Canton, with Chiang Kai-shek as its commandant, to train the officers of a national revolutionary army. In the same arrangement, the small Communist Party of China was admitted into the Nationalist Party, its members joining as individuals, an alliance, a united front of nationalists and communists, with the Soviet Republic standing behind it. That alliance still stands, but it stands less easily than it did. When Sun died, the leadership divided. Wang Jingwei on the left of the party, now abroad, others on the right, and Chiang, the man of the army. In March, in Canton, Chiang turned of a sudden upon the communist officers and the Soviet advisors attached to the city's garrison, placed them under arrest, and then released them. The united front did not break, but the warning had been given. And in these past days, the party has set down, in writing, the bounds within which the communists may act inside it. They are not to head its central committees or its departments. Their numbers are to be held to a fixed share, and they are to be entered upon a register. So the account of it, as it stands tonight, is this. The Nationalist Party of China keeps its alliance with the Communists and with Moscow. It has, this month, drawn a fence around the Communists within its own ranks, and the new chairmanship of the party rests with the patron of the man who holds its guns. The purpose of the Canton government has never been a secret, to unseat the warlords who rule the provinces of the North, to bring the country under one nationalist authority, and to be rid of the privileges the foreign powers hold upon Chinese soil. The correspondents of the Communist International have followed it closely under the standing call the movement abroad has raised, Hands Off China. Where the party goes from here, the coming months will show. Across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain are still out. It is a week now since the General Council of the Trades Union Congress went down to Downing Street and called off the great strike, the strike of more than 1 million workers who had come out beside the miners and left the miners to carry the dispute alone. The pits stand idle. The men hold to their refusal of the owners' terms, lower wages and longer hours. And the owners, who have the courts and the government beside them, need do nothing now but wait. That is the whole of the change today, which is to say there is none. The lockout goes on in its slow and grinding way as it has gone on since the first day of the month. And at home, in the mill town of Passaic in New Jersey, the textile strike holds. Some 16,000 workers, the most of them immigrants, Polish and Hungarian and Italian and Slav, a great many of them women, have been out of the woolen mills since the winter against a cut in their wages. Their strike is led by the Communists under a young organizer named Albert Weisbord, and it has been met as such strikes are met in this country, with the clubs of the police, with injunctions out of the courts, with families put out of the company houses, and with a press that calls a wage strike a Bolshevik plot. It has also lasted. It has lasted long enough and grown large enough that the Senate of the United States will take notice of it. A week from now in Washington, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor is to hold a hearing upon the strike at Passaic. That a strike led by communists of immigrant mill hands should compel a hearing in the Senate of the United States is itself a measure of what the people of Passaic have made by refusing through the winter and into the spring to go back. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs signing off for the night. In Washington this evening, President Coolidge has signed 2 laws with a single day's pen. By the first, the Air Commerce Act, the business of the air passes for the first time under the hand of the federal government. Its pilots to be licensed, its craft certified, its airways charted and kept. By the second, the Railway Labor Act, the government takes up the long quarrel of the railroads and lays down new machinery to keep the peace between the carriers and the men who run the trains. In New Jersey, the textile strike at Passaic holds into another month, and the Senate at Washington makes ready to hear it. Across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain hold on, locked out and alone, 8 days now since the general strike was called off. And from Massachusetts and the wider world beyond it, the cause of Sacco and Vanzetti widens 8 days after the Commonwealth's High Court denied the 2 men a new trial. In Morocco, the Rif Republic fights on alone, its peace talks broken, and 2 empires pressing it in concert. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Thursday, the 20th of May, 1926. new law is, in plain terms, a charter for an industry. It puts the nation's airmen under federal license. It brings their aircraft under federal regulation. And it lodges a new authority, an aeronautics branch, with the Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Hoover, to write the rules of the air and to see them kept. Consider how readily that authority was found. The aeroplane is a young thing, younger than a good many of the men who fly it. And already the federal government has reached out to it, drawn it a code, and built it a bureau to administer that code, so that the new industry of the air may grow in good order, and so that the capital ventured upon it may have the surety of law. Where new money needs the steadiness that only the state can give, the state has been quick to give it. Now, set beside that, the matters the same federal government has not found the means to reach. It fixes no floor beneath the wage of the man who rivets the frame of an aeroplane, nor beneath the woman who tends the worsted loom. It sets no limit upon the hours that such a worker may be held to the bench. It writes no federal guard upon the machine that takes a hand, or an arm, or a life, and sends the maimed man home without his week's pay. These things it leaves to the several states, which see to them unevenly, or do not see to them at all. And where the Congress has tried to do more, it has been turned back. When the Congress moved, in years not long past, to keep the labor of young children out of the mills, the High Court struck the law down. Such a reach it held lay beyond the power of the nation. And a wage that a woman might live upon, fixed in the federal capital itself, that same court found to be an offense against the liberty of contract. So the law is written tonight for the airway and found wanting for the loom. The federal hand that this evening reaches up to license the pilot and certify his craft has not in all these years reached down to set a price below which a day's labor may not be bought. That is the law as it stands. The reach that charts the air has found no path to the factory floor. The factory floor is not a figure of speech. In Passaic, in the state of New Jersey, some 16,000 textile workers still hold the picket line they first took up in January against the cutting of their wages. Theirs is among the largest strikes the country has running tonight, and it is one the American Federation of Labor would not put its name to. In the coming week, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor is to take up the matter of Passaic in Washington. The strike has grown large enough and lasted long enough that the Senate must at last sit and look at it for a day. What the looking will yield, no one on the line in Passaic can say, but the hearing is set. In Massachusetts, the case of Nicholas Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti stands where the court left it 8 days ago, when the Commonwealth's High Court denied the two men their motions for a new trial. But the case long ago ceased to be a Massachusetts matter, or a matter only for lawyers. In cities across this country and across the ocean, meetings are called in their names. The labor bodies, the Workers' Party, the defense leagues, and no small number of writers and professors have made what the two men's defenders call the Massachusetts frame-up their own cause. It widens by the week. From Morocco, where the Rif Republic fights on, alone, and against two empires at once. At the beginning of this month, the peace talks at Oujda between Abd el-Krim's envoys and the French broke down over the exchange of prisoners, among other matters, after some 3 weeks of negotiation. Since then, the combined offensive has resumed. France presses from the south, Spain from the north and the coast, the two in concert. Their forces in the field are reckoned above 100,000 men, with the aircraft and the artillery to match, against defenders who may count, by the most generous reckoning, perhaps a tenth of that number. The Rif's supply roads are cut, and its territory is pressed from every side. 5 years ago, the tribesmen of these mountains destroyed a Spanish army. This month, they stand against two powers acting together. The wires from Fez and from Madrid say little this week. What they do say is that the ring has grown tighter. And from the continent, a smaller note to close the night. In Brussels, the cabinet crisis that opened earlier this month is closed. The government of Mr. Poulet, having fallen, gives way to a successor, and Belgium has a ministry once more. It is the kind of change the continent has had occasion to make often this year. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. Into its fourth month, the textile strike at Passaic still holds. 16,000 workers of the New Jersey mills out since the depth of winter against a cut laid upon wages that were thin to begin with, and answered through these months with the club, the injunction, and the eviction. Tonight brings no fresh blow and no surrender, and behind that standing line is a longer history, one that runs back 14 years to another mill town and another hard winter. In Geneva, the delegates of some 20 nations have sat down together to prepare the disarmament of the world, Germany among them, and America. Soviet Russia, invited, has stayed away. And in Paris, the franc falls and prices climb behind it. And from Mexico, the quarrel between the government of Mr. Kaiser and the Catholic Church moves another step toward open rupture. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 21st of May, 1926. We have set the Passaic strike before you already this week, and tonight there is no fresh event to add to the account. What the day offers instead is room to ask an older question. Where does such a strike come from? Passaic is not a thing without ancestors. What is being tested on that picket line has been tested before, in the same trade, by the same kind of workers, and the country told itself, then as now, that the trouble was the work of foreign agitators rather than of hunger. To see plainly what Passaic is, it helps to remember Lawrence. 14 years ago, in the woolen city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, the same kind of workers struck the same kind of mills. It was the dead of winter, 1912. A cut in pay, the mill's answer to a new Massachusetts law that shortened the working week for the women and children of the mills. Fewer hours and less in the pay envelope to match brought tens of thousands of textile workers into the streets, immigrants of a dozen nationalities, women prominent among them, a great many of them unable to speak to one another except through some third tongue. The strike was led not by the respectable unions, but by the industrial workers of the world, the organization the press of the day treated as a foreign infection. It was a hard fight. The militia was called out. A striker named Anna Lopizzo was shot dead, and the strike's own leaders were charged with her killing on the theory that their words had done it. And when the strikers, unable to feed their children through a long winter walkout, began sending the little ones away by train to be kept by sympathizers in other cities, the authorities moved to stop even that, and the sight of police clubbing women and children at the railway station did more to shame the mills before the country than any speech could have done. And the workers won. They won the wage increase. They won for a season the thing the banners are remembered for asking: bread, and roses, too. Lawrence proved what the owners had sworn was impossible, that the immigrant working class, written off as unorganizable, divided by language and fresh off the boat, could in fact stand together and win. And the winning did not stop at the city line. Mills across New England, fearing the same medicine, raised wages in Lawrence's wake. Why did it fall to the industrial workers of the world to do that, and not to the great established body of American labor? The answer is the oldest division in the House of Labor itself, and it is the same division that leaves Passaic to fight alone tonight. The American Federation of Labor is built upon the craft, the skilled trade, the man who has served his apprenticeship and carries a skill the employer cannot easily replace. It organizes the machinist, the carpenter, the printer, each by his trade, and from that skill comes the bargaining power of the union. But the woolen mill does not run on craft. It runs on the mass, on thousands of hands tending machines built precisely so that an unskilled worker, a woman, a newcomer with no English, could be set to them within a week. There is no apprenticeship to withhold. To organize such a place, you cannot organize the craft, because there is no craft to organize. You must take the whole mass of the mill together, skilled and unskilled, every nationality on the floor, into one body. That is industrial unionism. It was the method the IWW brought to Lawrence, and it is the method the communist organizers have brought to Passaic now. The Federation has never made its peace with that method. At Lawrence, the craft unions kept their distance from the foreigners and the radicals. At Passaic, the Federation stands aside again, and it says plainly why. The strike is led by communists, by the organizers of the Workers' Party, and the Federation will not lend its name to such a leadership. So the strongest house of labor in the country keeps to its own side of the line on the question of who is doing the leading, while immigrant women are ridden down by mounted police in a New Jersey mill town. The working class on that line is divided three ways at once: by craft, by language, and by the difference between the respectable union and the red one. There is a reason the wage was cut at Passaic in the first place, a reason that reaches well beyond one company's ledger. The years since the war have been hard ones for the organized worker in America. The great drive of the employers through this decade has gone under a hopeful name, the open shop, the American plan, and its plain object has been to keep the union out of the plant and the wage soft. Where labor was strong, it was pressed back. Where it was weak, as among the unorganized immigrants of the textile towns, the wage could simply be cut, and cut again, with little standing in the way. The unions themselves count fewer members at the middle of this decade than they counted at its start. The drive has had its effect. Passaic is what that decade looks like at its far end. The hours shortened first, then the wage cut a tenth outright, laid upon the workers with the least power to refuse it, until they refused it anyway. The strike has at least grown too large to be ignored. A committee of the Senate at Washington is to take the matter up before the month is out. What that sitting will yield, no one on the picket line can say. What is being tested there is whether the lesson of Lawrence still holds. In Geneva this week, the powers are talking of disarmament. A commission of the League of Nations, preparatory it is called, to a general conference yet to be scheduled, has been sitting since Tuesday, with the delegates of some 20 nations at the table. The list of the company is the news. Germany sits among the powers that disarmed her. The United States, which never joined the League, has sent its men to this table. Soviet Russia, invited to it, has stayed away. What the commission is charged to prepare is the reduction of the armaments of the world. Set beside its agenda stand the month's other items as this broadcast has carried them. The guns at Warsaw, the aircraft over Damascus, the campaign pressing upon the Rif. The powers will discuss the instruments. The month has gone on using them. From Paris, a matter not of guns, but of money, though France is learning this spring that the two are never far apart. The franc is falling. It has fallen for months, and the fall has quickened. The dollar and the pound buy more francs week upon week, and prices in the shops climb behind the exchange like smoke behind a fire. The government of Mr. Briand meets the slide with reassurances the exchange does not believe. Behind the falling figure stands the war's unpaid bill, the debts, the rebuilding of the devastated North, the taxes never raised to cover either, and the franc is where the argument over who shall pay has come to rest. We will follow it. To Mexico, where the long quarrel between the revolutionary state and the Catholic Church draws toward an open break, a quarrel we have set down before, with the oil beneath it, and the reading in Washington that treats Mr. Caius's oil policy and his quarrel with the Church as a single Bolshevik design. What is new tonight is not the quarrel, but its hardening. The Constitution's strictures upon the Church are 9 years old, and for most of that time they sat unenforced, the governments before Mr. Caius preferring not to provoke the fight. He has chosen otherwise, so that what is moving in Mexico is, at bottom, no quarrel about doctrine. It is the old question of whether the church keeps the land, the schools, and the power it held under the old regime, and a revolutionary state's answer to it. We will report it as it comes. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Baghdad, the government of Iraq has set its hand to a bargain that signs away the oil of one of its frontier districts for 35 years more, the latest turn in the long carving up of that country's ground among the powers that hold it. From Tokyo, the workers of Japan have a new federation of their unions tonight, 400 delegates strong, raised up in the teeth of the police and the employers. From Hokkaido, in the same mail of wires, the volcano Tokachi has erupted, and a flood of melted snow and broken mountain has come down upon the farm villages below it. From Britain, the great strike was called off 12 days ago, but the Cold War that lay beneath it is not. The miners are locked out into the 4th week, and no peace is yet in sight. From Warsaw, the marshal who took the capital by force is offered now the presidency by law, and even some who blessed his rising are uneasy at the powers he would carry into the office. From Morocco, the chief of the Rif, who once humbled an empire, has put out feelers for a truce, and France replies that it will hear nothing short of surrender. And from the Levant, Lebanon has adopted a constitution, and a republic is proclaimed under the French mandate. And nearer the matters we have followed all month, the strikers of Passaic are summoned at last to Washington. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Monday, the 24th of May, 1926. Two reports reach us tonight from quarters of the world the great papers of London and New York seldom trouble to cover. We begin in Baghdad. The government of Iraq has affirmed and extended a concession over the oil of what are called the transferred territories, a strip of country along the Persian frontier, adding to it, in a revised form, a further 35 years. The concession runs to a British company, the Anglo-Persian, which has held oil rights in the region since before the war by way of the old Darcy grant. That is the news in its dry administrative form. A few signatures in an office in Baghdad, a line of figures, a term of years. It is also a small window onto a very large arrangement. Iraq is not an old nation, but a recent invention. 3 provinces of the broken Ottoman Empire, Mosul and Baghdad and Basra, fastened together after the war. While the Turks still held them, the powers of Europe had already drawn their pencils across the map. In the middle of the war, Britain and France divided the Arab lands between themselves in a secret understanding, the one we now know by the names of the 2 men who drew it, an Englishman and a Frenchman. And when the war was won, the division was made public and proper at a conference on the Italian Riviera, where the spoils were handed round under a new word the League of Nations had supplied. Not colonies, but mandates. France took the Levant. Britain took Mesopotamia and Palestine. The peoples who lived on the ground were not consulted, they were assigned. Beneath those provinces, and especially beneath Mosul in the north, lies one of the great untapped oil fields of the earth, and from the moment the war ended, every power understood it. When the Arabs of Mesopotamia rose against their new British masters, and they rose in great numbers 6 years ago this summer, the rising was put down in part from the air by aeroplanes of the Royal Air Force, sent over the villages of the Euphrates, a cheaper way of holding a country than by infantry, and a method Britain has used in that land ever since. On the throne, the British set a king, Faisal, lately driven by the French out of Damascus, and around the king they wrote a treaty that kept the real decisions in British hands. Then there was the question of Mosul itself. Turkey claimed the province for its own. The matter went to the League, whose council awarded Mosul to Iraq, which is to say, to the mandate, only this past December, and on the condition, among others, that the British guardianship continue for as much as a quarter century more. The final terms between London and Angora are being drawn still. The award came with undertakings of another kind as well, for the Kurds of Mosul, their language in the schools and the courts of the province, their own people among its administrators, promises set down at Geneva in the same decision that confirmed the mandate. Now to the company. The arrangement the powers built to share the spoils has a name, and the name tells the story: the Turkish Petroleum Company. It holds the concession over the Mosul and Baghdad fields, granted by the Iraqi government the year past, and its shares are held not by Iraqis, but by the British and the French. And a consortium of American oil houses is now being brought into the company besides: the Standard companies of New Jersey and New York, the Gulf, the Sinclair, and others, admitted after Washington pressed London hard for what it was pleased to call the open door, meaning a door open to American oil capital. So the reckoning stands like this: a British company holds the frontier fields. An Anglo-French company, the Americans now at its door, holds the heart of the country. And the government of Iraq signs the papers. The one party to all this, whose oil it actually is, takes a royalty and a seat below the salt. This is what a mandate is, examined at the level of the ledger rather than the speech. The League of Nations granted Britain the mandate over Iraq as a sacred trust, a guardianship to lead the country toward standing on its own. What the guardianship has produced, on the evidence of the oil concessions, is a country whose chief wealth is spoken for by foreign companies for decades into the future. Tonight's bargain lays a further 35 years atop a grant already running, carrying it on near to the close of the century. The Iraqi who is a child tonight will be an old man before the frontier oil is his country's to dispose of. The powers do not call this conquest. They call it development and concession and trusteeship. The oil flows the same under any of the words. And now to Tokyo, and a report of a wholly different color. For not all the news of the working world is news of defeat. In the Japanese capital, delegates of some 25 trade unions have met in the Asakusa quarter of the city and founded a new National Federation of Labor. They call it, in their language, the All-Japan Libertarian Federation of Labor Unions. 400 delegates, better than 8,000 workers behind them, the printers of Tokyo chief among them. It stands now as the third of the great labor federations of Japan, apart from the cautious, respectable confederation that holds the larger numbers, and apart no less from the rival body that looks to Moscow for its direction. These unions, by their charter, take direction from no party at all. Japan came out of the war an industrial power in a hurry, its mills and shipyards and printing houses swollen, its cities filled with a new working class, and that class did not stay quiet. In the year the war ended, the price of rice rose past what working families could bear, and the country broke into riots that ran through scores of towns and had to be put down by soldiers. Out of those years, the unions grew, but the state grew watchful in the same measure. Only the year past, the same parliament that at last gave Japanese men the vote passed, in the other hand, a law against dangerous thoughts, a measure that makes a crime of organizing to alter the form of the state or to abolish private property, and that hangs over every meeting of every union and every society of the left. The political police are not a rumor there. They are a daily fact of a militant worker's life. And it is not so long since the state showed what it would do at the extreme. Some 15 years past, a circle of anarchists was hanged on a manufactured charge of plotting against the emperor, a warning the labor movement has not forgotten. It was in that country, under that law, that these delegates met, and the lasting thing from their founding is the charter they wrote. These Japanese workers declared that they based their movement on the class struggle, that they organize by industry and reject the rule of any central authority over them, and that they are opposed to imperialist aggression, and that they call for the international solidarity of the working class. In Baghdad, the oil of a subject people is signed over to the companies of the imperial powers. In Tokyo, the workers of one of those powers declare themselves against imperial aggression and for the solidarity of labor across every frontier. The wells of Mosul and the printers of Tokyo are nearer to one another than the map would have you think. From Japan again, and graver news by this morning's wires. On the northern island of Hokkaido, the volcano Tokachi has erupted, and the eruption did what fire does when it falls upon deep spring snow. It made a flood of it. A torrent of melted snow and ash and broken mountainside came down the valleys. The dispatches say it reached the farming villages below within the half hour, faster than any warning could travel, and buried them. The dead are counted already in the scores at Kamifurano and the settlements near it, and the count is not finished. Whole households are missing in the mud. The valleys that took the flood are among the most settled farm country on the island, and it is the planting season when the work of the year is just going into the ground. We will carry the fuller accounting as the wires bring it. Across to Britain, where the loud thing is over and the hard thing is not. 12 days ago, the general strike was called off, and the country told itself the crisis had passed. But the strike was never the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is coal, and the coal stoppage goes on. The miners locked out of the pits into a fourth week now, the wheels of the country turning slow on the fuel that is left. The dispute beneath it has not changed, and we have set it before you before, so we will not set it out again at length. The owners demand longer hours and lower wages to make British coal pay against the world's. The men will not take them, and the government, having stood off the general strike, can now turn its whole attention to the single industry it left standing alone. What is new tonight is the shape of the waiting. Mr. Baldwin's government put a sum of money on the table, a temporary subsidy to keep the pits from ruin while a settlement is sought. And that offer does not stand open forever. By its own terms, it runs out with the month. The miners' executive may meet, the dispatches say, to weigh what the Prime Minister has offered before the clock runs down. Neither side, as of tonight, has moved to break the deadlock. Strip the matter to its bones, and the question is an old one. Who shall pay for coal that cannot be dug at a profit? The owners say the miner shall pay, in his wage and his hours. The miner says he has paid enough. And the government, which would rather not say aloud that it must pay anything, watches the calendar. The general strike was the thunder. This is the long drought after it. And droughts are decided not in a day, but in who can hold out the longer. To Warsaw now, where a coup won in the street is proving harder to win in the law. 10 days ago, as we reported, Marshal Piłsudski took the Polish capital by force of arms, and the question of who held the real power was answered by the guns. The other question, by what right and under what constitution, was not answered, and it is that question Warsaw is fighting over tonight. The president who sat through the fighting has resigned, and a National Assembly is summoned for the end of the month to choose a successor. The marshal has agreed to stand for the office himself. So far, this has the look of an orderly succession, a soldier who took power, returning it to the forms of law. But the dispatches carry a second note under the first. The marshal's supporters are pressing in the same breath for the powers of the presidency to be enlarged, for the office he would take to be a stronger office than the one the last man held. And that is where the unease begins. Among the very liberals and socialists who looked on his rising with sympathy, or at least without grief, there is now a growing resistance to what some of them are calling a legalized autocracy, a dictatorship not seized but voted, dressed in the robes of the Constitution it would hollow out. So the real story of Poland this week is not the simple one the headlines told a fortnight ago, that Piłsudski had won. It is the harder one, whether a victory taken by force can be made lawful without burying the parliament that is asked to bless it. And from North Africa, the slow end of a war that for 5 years was the great hope of every people held under a European flag. In the mountains of the Rif, in northern Morocco, Abd el-Krim built a republic and an army out of the Berber tribes, and with them he did what no colonial subject was supposed to be able to do. He beat a European power in the field. It was Spain he broke first, in a disaster the Spanish have not forgotten, and for a time his name traveled the whole colonial world as proof that the thing could be done. It can be undone, too, when the empires stop quarreling among themselves and combine. France and Spain together have drawn the net tight this past year, landings on the coast, columns from the south, and tribe after tribe falling away from the reef as the cause grows hopeless. And now, by the dispatches reaching Paris and Fez, Abd el-Krim has put out feelers through intermediaries for an end to the fighting. The answer from the French side is hardening as we speak. Not a negotiated peace, not an armistice that might leave the man his dignity and his legend, but an unconditional and personal surrender, nothing less. France means to take no settlement that could be read anywhere in its empire as a draw. The point is not only to win the war. The point is to stage the ending of it as a lesson, addressed to every other subject people that might be watching to see how such a story comes out. How it comes out, we do not yet know. Tonight, the net is closing, and the terms are surrender or nothing. And from Beirut, by yesterday's dispatches, Lebanon has a constitution. The Representative Council adopted it on Sunday, and the Lebanese Republic was proclaimed the same afternoon. A parliament of 2 chambers, a president to be chosen in the days ahead, the forms of a constitutional state complete. It is the same France that holds the mandate over Syria across the mountains, and these dispatches reach us in the same week as the reports of aircraft over Damascus. In Lebanon, the mandate writes a constitution. In Syria, it writes notices of bombardment. Both are issued under the same authority, toward the same stated purpose, the leading of peoples toward governing themselves. A constitution is not a small thing, and the men who drew this one in Beirut are in earnest about the state it builds. But the power that grants a constitution keeps the power to suspend it, and the same hand that signs the one over Beirut is loosing the bombs over the Ghouta. That is the shape of a mandate, in the Levant as in Mesopotamia, the local office and the external master who keeps the key to it. Home now to the United States, and a quarrel that shows the great experiment of prohibition for what it has become, less a moral crusade than a tangle over who has the power to enforce it. The President has lately put forward a new plan for drying up the country, to deputize local officers, county by county, as agents of the federal government, so that the sheriff's men might enforce the national liquor law where the federal service is too thin on the ground to reach. From California comes the first sharp answer. The Attorney General of that state has questioned in public whether the plan is even lawful, whether a county deputy can be turned into a federal officer by such an arrangement, and whose authority he then answers to. It is a dry argument in the legal sense, and some would say in no other, but it shows what prohibition actually is 6 years on. It is not a settled law that the whole country obeys. It is a running battle between Washington and the states, between one office and another, over how the law is to be enforced at all. The saloon was abolished by amendment. The drinking was not, and the machinery built to stop it spends as much of its strength fighting itself as fighting the liquor. From Washington again, by Saturday's wires, a curious piece of lawmaking. The President has signed an act to create 2 great national parks in the eastern mountains, one in the Blue Ridge of Virginia, one in the Great Smoky Range along the Tennessee and Carolina line. But the act buys nothing. Congress has authorized the parks and appropriated not a dollar for their ground. The land, hundreds of thousands of acres of it, must first be bought and presented as a gift by the states and by private subscription before the government will consent to administer it. The nation will take the deed. The public must raise the price. A shorter dispatch and a grimmer one, of the kind the modern papers print so often that the eye learns to slide past it. The wires count 18 dead across the country from a single Sunday, killed in aeroplane crashes and at the crossings where the railroads cut the roads, with more hurt in the derailment of a train in the east. The aeroplane and the fast train are the prizes of the age, sold as speed and progress and the shrinking of distance. They take their steady toll in the meanwhile, A few souls every Sunday, counted in a column and turned past. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Paris this afternoon, Simon Petliura is dead, the exiled leader of the short-lived Ukrainian Republic, and a name that carries for a great many people the memory of the pogroms, was shot down in the open street, and the man who did it did not run. He is in the hands of the police, and he says that he meant to do it. From Bucharest, Romania has chosen the parliament, the first under a new law that hands the leading party a commanding premium of seats. The government of General Aberescu stood for election under it today, and it is the government that stands to gain. From Washington, the president has signed a law to spend $165 million upon the building of federal offices, granite found readily enough by a state that finds so little for the men out of work. From Cairo, by the weekend's wires, Egypt has voted, and the nationalists of the Waft have swept the parliament. And tonight, two stories still unfinished. From Morocco, France refusing the chieftain of the Rif any terms but surrender. And from Japan, the dead still being dug from the mud of Hokkaido. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Tuesday, the 25th of May, 1926. The heaviest news of the day comes out of Paris, and it is a killing. This afternoon, on a street in the Latin Quarter, a man walked up to Simon Petliura, the Ukrainian exile, once the head of his country's brief independent government, and shot him dead in the open daylight. The assassin did not flee. He gave himself to the police and, by the reports that reach us, told them plainly that he had done what he came to do. His name is given as Schwarzbard. He is a Jew born in the Ukraine. Petliura had lived in Paris a year and more, editing his fellow exiles' journal, presiding over what remained of his government's offices, a head of state without a state. Around him in Paris there had gathered a small world of such men. The Ukrainian emigration, the remnant of a lost cause, keeping its papers, its offices, and its quarrels alive in a foreign city. It was into that world that the shots came this afternoon. That is the whole of what can be said with confidence tonight about the deed itself. Why a man would cross a city to shoot an exiled politician in the street, and what this killing will come to stand for, is a far larger matter, and a bitterly contested one. Simon Petliura rose to the head of the Ukraine in the chaos that followed the fall of the Russian Empire. When the empire of the Tsars came down in 1917, it did not come down evenly. At the center, in Petrograd, one government gave way to another, and at last to the Bolsheviks. But out on the rim, in the great wheat lands between Russia and Poland, the fall of the center meant the fall of all authority at once, and into that emptiness a dozen forces poured. For something near 4 years, those borderlands were a country in name and a battlefield in fact. No settled frontier, no army that held the ground for long. No government in Kiev that did not give way within months to the next. The city changed hands a dozen times and more. Germans came and went. A hetman ruled under German bayonets and fell when the bayonets withdrew. Reds took the city, and whites and reds again. Peasant bands under their own captains held the countryside between the armies. The people of those towns learned to count their rulers by the season, and to know that whoever held the railway station that month would want bread and horses and men. It was in that whirl that Petliura rose. He had begun, like many of the men of his generation's revolutions, on the left, a socialist and a journalist, before he was ever a head of state. He led the directory of the Ukrainian People's Republic, and for a time held its government and commanded its armies both, the figurehead of the Ukrainian bid for a nation of its own, in the narrow window between the German collapse and the Bolshevik consolidation. When that bid was failing in 1920, he made his last cast. He allied himself with Marshal Piłsudski's Poland, the same Piłsudski whose guns in Warsaw we have reported these past weeks, and traded away Ukrainian claims in the West for Polish arms against Soviet Russia. For a season, the gamble ran. That spring, the Allied armies took Kiev itself. They could not hold it. The tide came back. The war rolled west, and when Poland and Soviet Russia at last made their peace, the lands Petlura had fought for were divided between the two of them, and his republic was on neither side of the line. The Ukraine became Soviet, and Petlura became an exile, and exile in those years was its own whole condition. The wreck of the old empires had loosed across Europe an entire population of stateless people, officers and ministers, and whole governments in miniature, carrying papers that no government quite honored, moving from one capital's cheap rooms to the next on the charity of those who had got out with money. Petlura moved with them, Warsaw, Vienna, Budapest, Geneva, until he settled late in 1924 in Paris. There he presided over a republic that existed now only in the loyalty of the men who had carried it out of the country in their hearts. But there is another thing the name carries, and it is the thing that put the man with the revolver on that Paris street. In those same years of civil war, a wave of pogroms swept across the Ukraine, massacres of Jews, town after town, of a savagery that is hard to set into plain words. Where authority collapses and armies live off the country, it is very often the Jews of the small towns who are made to pay. And in the Ukraine of those years, they paid on a scale the modern record had not seen. The killings were the work of many hands, of the white armies who married the slaughter to their banner of a Russia restored, of peasant bands and free captains who needed no banner at all, of the Polish forces, and of the troops of the Ukrainian Republic, the armies that marched under Petlura's name. Nor was any side wholly clean of it. The Red Army's record in those years was the least bloody of them, but it was not spotless. The dead are counted in the tens of thousands across all the forces and all the sides, and no one has ever counted them exactly. Whole communities went into the ground with no one left behind to keep the tally. That is the ledger the killing in Paris has torn open again. For nearly 7 years it has sat unsettled. No court ever tried the men who did the killing in those towns. No government ever owned the dead, and the survivors carried the memory out along the very same exile roads the defeated generals traveled, so that the wronged and the accused passed the rest of their lives in the same handful of European cities, reading the same emigre papers, knowing one another's addresses. Whether Petlura himself willed these killings, or tried to halt them, or simply could not govern the men who did them in his name, that is disputed, and bitterly. He issued condemnations. There is record of his ordering some of it stopped. There is also the plain fact that it was done by his armies, in his war, nominally under his authority. To a great many Ukrainians, he is a national martyr, the leader of a free Ukraine that the Bolsheviks strangled in its cradle, struck down at last in exile. To a great many Jews, and the man who fired the shots is said to be one of them, and to have lost the better part of his own family in those years, he is the name that sits atop the worst thing that ever happened to them. Both of these are held tonight with the whole force of conviction by people who lived through the very thing they are speaking of. Today, on the Rue Racine, one of those people answered the question with a revolver. And the answer will not stay on that one street. Already, by the dispatches, the news is running through the whole exile world, through the Ukrainian circles, who will mourn Petlura as a martyr of the nation, and through Jewish opinion across Europe, where the name of the man now in the cell is spoken very differently. A man lies dead in a Paris street. Another sits in a Paris cell, awaiting trial. We will report the trial when it comes. And from Bucharest, Romania chose a Chamber of Deputies today, the first election held under a new electoral law whose arithmetic is the whole of the story. The law awards the party that leads the poll not merely its share of the seats, but a commanding premium of them, a great block of seats handed over by statute, on top of whatever the voters themselves gave, to whichever party comes first. The government of General Aberescu, a soldier in politics, conservative and authoritarian in temper, returned to the premiership only this spring, stood for election under that law today, and it is the government that stands to gather the premium. This is fast becoming the common kind of election across this whole band of Europe, from the Baltic down to the Balkans. The forms of the parliamentary nation remain: the ballot, the parties, the count, the chamber. But around the forms has grown a different machinery, a law drafted to manufacture a majority out of a plurality, an administration that puts its thumb on the scale of the count, officials and gendarmes in the country districts who understand well enough which way the government in the capital wishes the returns to fall, and who arrange matters accordingly. It is a way of keeping the appearance of the thing while hollowing out its meaning, a parliament that photographs like a parliament and works like a grant of power. The returns from today will take some days to gather, but the heart of the matter did not wait upon the count. It was written into the law before a single ballot was cast. To Egypt, whose ballots were counted while Paris filled our wires, the Waft, the nationalist party of Saad Zaghloul, has swept the parliament, taking the great bulk of its seats. It was the first election held under a law that opened the rolls to men the old property qualifications had shut out, and the broadened franchise spoke plainly. It spoke for the party that demands the British out. What follows is far less plain. Egypt is a kingdom with a parliament of its own. It is also a country garrisoned by British troops, with a British residency that keeps the last word. And London has made it understood before, and not long before, that there are men it will not abide at the head of an Egyptian government, Zaghloul first among them. 2 years ago, it forced him from office under threat. The chamber now is unmistakably his. Whether the government will be is a question the wires cannot yet answer. To Washington and the matter of public money. The President has put his signature to the Public Buildings Act, a measure authorizing the federal government to spend, by the report of the wires, some $165 million upon the construction and repair of its own offices and courthouses and customs houses across the country, on a scale not undertaken in years. It is in itself an unremarkable thing. A government must house itself. But it is a sign of what the American state is quietly becoming. Year upon year it grows, in clerks, in bureaus, in the reach of its departments, and now in brick and granite and stone. Post offices in towns that never had one. Federal halls in cities that until now did their federal business in rented rooms above a bank. This is the architecture of a state getting steadily physically larger and raising the buildings to prove it. It strikes differently, all the same, set against the season the country has just lived through. Here is a government that can find, readily and with little argument, the public money to raise stone buildings for its own departments. The very same government that has discovered again and again that it has no power and no funds for the relief of the man thrown out of work, no floor to set beneath a wage, no hand to extend to a mining family or a textile family living this spring at the edge of hunger. The Treasury, plainly, is not empty. The question is only what it is opened for, and for whom. From Britain, the coal lockout holds, as we reported. The owners unmoved, the miners unmoved, and the government's offer of a subsidy good only to the month's end. And from Warsaw, the constitutional fight we set before you continues. Marshal Piłsudski's men hold the streets, but a lawful form for the power they took is not yet settled. From Japan, the toll of the mountain we reported yesterday is beginning to come in. The volcano in Hokkaido that loosed a wall of mud and melted snow down its valley has begun to give up its dead. Some 50 bodies recovered already by the dispatches reaching us from Tokyo this day, with Army engineers and relief parties pushing in over broken ground. The railway is torn out of the earth. The flood has ruined the rice land in the very season it should have been planted, and the count is plainly far from finished. 50 is the number that has been found, not the number that was lost. And to close, a lighter word from Scotland. The amateurs of golf have gathered at Muirfield for Britain's championship, And, as has rather become the habit of these last few years, the men to watch are the Americans. Bobby Jones, the young Atlanta player whose name has carried across the Atlantic until he is near as well known on the British links as on his own, came safely through his round and plays on. His countryman, Robert Gardner, did not. Gardner is beaten and out. And another Atlanta man, Watts Gunn, won his way through, so that American hopes go forward yet on a Scottish course. And on a day such as this one, the cabled scores from a far green links are their own quiet kind of relief. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Morocco, by the dispatches of the evening. Abd el-Krim, the man who destroyed a Spanish army at Anual and raised a republic in the mountains of the Rif, is tonight in the hands of France. 5 years of war against one empire and then against two together are at their end. From Beirut, the new Lebanese republic has its first president, chosen under the same French mandate whose aircraft we lately reported over Damascus. And from Washington, a committee of the United States Senate sat today upon the matter of the Passaic textile strike. The strikers of Passaic have their hearing at last. And in New York, the fur workers, under the same kind of leadership, hold a strike of their own into its 4th month. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 26th of May, 1926. A war has ended tonight in the mountains of North Africa. Abd el-Krim, the judge's son who made himself master of the Rif, has surrendered. The first dispatches reached the wires today. He has given himself up to the French command in the field. It was Spain whose army he destroyed, and Spain whose memory of that destruction is longest. He has put himself in the hands of the other empire, and the terms of his keeping are not yet settled. The Rif Republic he proclaimed and led, the mountain state that stood against Spain alone and then against Spain and France together, is finished. We reported in our last dispatch that the peace talks at Oujda had broken down and the combined offensive had resumed. Tonight, that offensive has its conclusion. It did not end in a parley. By the reports of these past days, the approach came first from the Rif side, an offer carried through intermediaries for an end to the fighting. And the answer out of Paris was that the fighting would continue until the surrender was complete, made without conditions and made by the man himself in person. Premier Briand, those same reports have it, would have it understood that the chief of the Rif was no longer a power with whom France would treat, not a belligerent to be granted terms, but a rebel to be received. There was to be no armistice that might be read afterward as a draw between equals, no formula by which the mountains might save their face. The submission was to be complete and seen to be complete. 5 years ago, his name was little known beyond the Rif itself. By the time France took the field against him, it was a name carried in the European press and spoken of wherever men watched to see whether a mountain people could humble an empire. Tonight, that question has its answer, and the answer is the one the empires meant it to be. The war began in earnest in the summer of 1921 with one of the greatest disasters European arms have ever suffered in the colonial war. The Spanish command in eastern Morocco had pushed a line of small posts deep into the mountains, 135 positions strung out far from the coast, on poor tracks, short of water, with a thin reserve behind them. The advance had outrun everything that sustains an army, and the officers who said so were not listened to. In July, the Riffians closed upon the forward post of Igueriben, hard by the main camp at Anual. The relief columns failed. The garrison tried to break out, and of some 300 men, perhaps 30 came through. The next morning, Anual itself was ordered abandoned, and within a few hundred meters of the camp, the withdrawal became a rout. The cavalry rode itself nearly to destruction, covering the men who ran. What remained of the command fell back at last upon Monte Aruit, where some 3,000 were surrounded. Some 10 days later, they capitulated. And after the capitulation, they were massacred. The inquiry the Army itself conducted put the dead of that summer near 13,000. The figure was disputed in the Cortes from the day it was set down. The scale was disputed by no one. And the guns the Spanish Army abandoned in that retreat became the artillery of the Rif. Abd el-Krim built upon the victory. By 1924, his forces held most of Spanish Morocco, and they were not a horde. A drilled regular corps, the tribal levies around it, and behind them, the guns taken from Spain. In the spring of 1925, he made the decision that has now destroyed him. He struck south into the French zone toward Fez. France answered with war. 160,000 men mobilized, 16 squadrons of aircraft, and Marshal Pétain, the defender of Verdun, sent south to direct the campaign. By the summer's agreements at Madrid, France and Spain bound themselves to act together. A one-front war became a war of annihilation on two. That September came the blow at Alhucemas Bay. Some 13,000 Spanish assault troops were gathered at Ceuta and Melilla. 16,000 by countings that take in the follow-on waves. A fleet of better than 100 ships assembled. Landings were feinted elsewhere along the coast to draw off the defense. At 6 in the morning of the 8th of September, the naval guns opened upon the bay, and 2 hours later, 76 aircraft came over the beaches. The landing barges grounded on rock 50 meters from the shore. The tanks, meant to lead the way, could not be put ashore. The infantry waded in under fire. By nightfall, they held the headland and a foothold of 8,000 men, within sight of Ajder, the Republic's capital. Fleet, aircraft, and landing force under a single command. Warfare of a kind the world had not yet seen in earnest. There is also a darker chapter, which the communiques have never carried. For better than a year, the European press has printed reports, the Gazette of Lausanne set them out as far back as the winter of 1924, that the campaign against the Rif has been pressed from the air with asphyxiating gas. And an American correspondent reported gas shells fired in last year's fighting in the French zone besides. Neither Madrid nor Paris acknowledges it. He did not surrender because the mountains were beaten in a single battle. He surrendered because by this spring, the war beneath him had come apart. Once the combined offensive resumed, the tribes that had risen with him began to come down out of it, disbanding, making their separate peace, a part of them turning against him. By the reports reaching France, he had lost ground even within his own tribe. The supply that had kept the Republic armed was cut. The coast watched, the routes through Tangier closed, the mountain country left to feed a war it could no longer win. Governor Stieg, for the French, put a figure to it, claiming that France had won back some 18,000 families from the Rif cause, and with them 18,000 rifles. Take that for the victor's arithmetic rather than a settled count, but the direction of it is not in doubt. A movement that had begun by destroying an army ended by dissolving from within. And so, this month, the approach came at last from the Rif side, and France held to the answer it had already given. So stood the ledger of this war at its end. On the one side, a mountain people, a few thousand regulars, the tribal levies, the captured guns. On the other, two empires, armies counted by the 100,000, the fleet, the aircraft, and the reports of gas. The mountains held 5 years against it. Tonight, they are quiet. From Beirut, the Lebanese Republic, whose new constitution we reported on Monday, has its first president. The Representative Council has made the choice we then said was coming, Charles Debus, who takes the office as the first man to hold it. Debus is a Greek Orthodox Christian, and that is not incidental. Lebanon is a country of communities, Maronite Christians, Greek Orthodox, Sunni and Shia Muslims, the Druze, and others besides, each with its own clergy, its own quarters, its own long memory. The new order does not pretend these divisions away. It builds them into the machinery of the state. Office is to be parceled out among the confessions by a kind of standing arithmetic, a balance struck not at the ballot box, but in advance, so that no single community holds all the levers and each is bought into the whole. A Greek Orthodox president, chosen by a council seated upon the same principle, is the first working of that bargain. It is a way of holding a fractured country together by giving every community a stake in the same state, and by the same stroke of making a man's confession the first fact of his public life, set down before his vote. But there is a second balance behind the first, and it is the one that decides the rest. The Constitution, the two chambers, the President, all of it sits beneath the French mandate, and the mandate keeps what it does not give away. The High Commissioner remains above the new offices. France may yet suspend, may dissolve, may decide. So the Republic is real in its forms and conditional in its substance. A Lebanese president, a Lebanese parliament, and over them the same France whose proceedings across the mountains at Damascus this broadcast has reported through the month. In Washington today, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor sat to hear the matter of the Passaic textile strike upon a resolution calling for a federal investigation of conditions there. We have carried this strike from our first broadcasts. Today it became the business of the United States Senate. Consider what was required to bring it about. This is a strike the American Federation of Labor refused to back and said plainly why. Its leadership is communist. It was organized by Albert Weisbord, a young man who left the Harvard Law School for the Workers' Party and went into the mill towns with a handful of organizers to build a committee of the whole mass of the mills, skilled and unskilled together. The owners would not meet it. The police met it with clubs, the courts with injunctions, the company houses with eviction. The press of its own county wrote it down as a Bolshevik provocation rather than a wage dispute. And in a country where the word communist closes most doors, 4 months of holding have now opened the door of a Senate committee room. Federal attention that no friend in high places arranged, because the strike never had one. Passaic is not the only strike in this country under communist leadership, and tonight it is no longer the only one too large to look past. In New York, the fur workers, 12,000 and more in the lofts of Lower Manhattan, are into the 4th month of their own strike. For the 40-hour week, for equal division of the work in the slack season, for an end to the contract system. The fur trade is a world of its own. It came to Lower Manhattan out of the old Russian Pale, where furriery was one of the few crafts the Tsar's restrictions left open to Jews. And it remains Jewish on both sides of the bargain. Jewish manufacturers across the table from Jewish workers, and old country trade fighting an old country fight in New World lofts. They have been met in the New York manner. Picket permits revoked, arrests by the hundred, injunctions and strikebreakers supplied through the gangs that hire themselves out as private police in that city. Their union is an old one, founded in 1913 and fought over ever since between its right wing and its left. The left holds New York, and at its head stands Ben Gold, who came into the fur shops as a boy and the joint board as a communist. The Federation keeps its distance here as at Passaic, and for the same stated reason. From Bucharest, the returns we said would take some days are coming in, and they tell one story plainly. The government has won, and won enormously. General Aberescu's People's Party and its allies have taken the great bulk of the new chamber. It is a majority of the kind the new electoral law was built to produce, the statute that hands the leading party a premium of seats beyond its share of the votes. We set the principle before you when the polling closed. It did not wait upon the count. Now the count has caught up to it, and the leading party gathers a majority the divided country's ballots did not of themselves give it. It is the pattern of this part of Europe in these years, the forms of the ballot kept, and the result shaped by the rules written around it. From Paris, the killing of Simon Petliura, which we set before you last night, has not stayed a killing. The gunman is held for trial, and the argument over what his death means between the Ukrainian emigres who mourn an exiled leader and those for whom the name calls up the pogrom years has already widened past anything a court will weigh quickly. From Warsaw, the constitutional fight we have followed since the May Rising goes on. Marshal Piłsudski's push to gather power into the presidency is meeting resistance, even from some of his own natural supporters in the same, who will not hand him a free hand without a program of reform to go with it. And from Britain, the coal question stands where it stood, the general strike broken, the miners still out, and the subsidy clock running toward a settlement no nearer than before. From the Atlantic, the Crown Prince of Sweden is at sea, bound for the United States. Gustav Adolf, heir to the Swedish throne, is crossing with the Crown Princess on a tour of the American Republic, and the newspapers have made a small sensation of it, not for the visit alone, but for the manner of it. The prince, it is reported, means to speak with the reporters himself, in his own person, setting aside the older royal habit of holding the press at the length of a chamberlain's arm. His first errand in Washington is a fitting one. He is to take part in the unveiling of a monument to John Ericsson, the Swedish engineer who left the old country for the new, and who built for the Union, in its war, the ironclad Monitor that fought the rebel Merrimac to a standstill in the waters off Virginia. Ericsson was no soldier, but an engineer, the man who gave the world's navies the screw propeller, and who changed for good what a warship was. He died an American. The monument is the new country's, thanks to an old country's son. A Swedish prince come to honor a Swedish hand that armed an American cause. It is the kind of errand the courts arrange to bind two peoples with a ceremony. And this one minded besides to answer the reporters himself when his ship makes port. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. Abdelkrim is within the French lines tonight. The chief who 5 years ago broke a Spanish army in a single week crossed over today into the keeping of the power that beat him and was put under escort toward the town of Taza. Premier Briand carried the news to Paris after a sitting of the cabinet. With its leader given up, the Republic of the Rif, a state with ministries and taxes, roads and telephone wire, raised by a mountain people in the teeth of two empires, has passed out of existence. The powers that broke it will now draw the terms, and Paris deliberates this night what is to be done with the man in its hands. And from Moscow, by dispatches some days old, the Communist International has issued an appeal to the workers of every country for the support of Britain's locked-out miners. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day, given whole. Thursday, the 27th of May, 1926. It is done, and it was made to be seen done. Abdelkrim, who gave out word of his surrender yesterday, crossed today into the French lines and was placed under escort for Taza. Premier Briand carried the news to the chamber in Paris after a sitting of his cabinet. There is a theater to this. The French might have been content with a signed paper and a far-off submission, but they wanted the man himself, within their lines, on their roads, moving under their guard toward their town, so that the thing should be seen done and not mistaken, not an ambiguous armistice, nor a tribe quietly slipping away, but a rebel delivered up in person. For 5 years, the empires of Europe could not lay hands on him. Today, they have, and they mean for it to be looked at. And as its leader passed into French keeping, the state he led was formally ended. The Rif Republic, proclaimed in the wake of Annual, master of most of Spanish Morocco at its height, is disestablished. Its territory passes back under the two protectorates whose partition of Morocco 14 years ago drew the lines the war was fought across. Its leader is at the disposal of Paris, his fate not yet announced. It did not die for want of asking to live. Abd el-Krim sought terms from Madrid in the Republic's first years and was refused. He sought recognition from London and from Paris and was refused. This spring, his envoys offered peace at the Ujda talks, whose collapse we reported. Autonomy under the Sultan was on his table and came away with nothing. The French Residency has claimed that in the war's last season, the tribes were coming over to the Protectorate's side in numbers. The mountains were starved, the tribes were leaving, and the offers had all been declined. What remained was the surrender we reported last night. The terms of the peace, what becomes of the tribes that fought, what is owed and by whom, where the soldiers of two empires will now stand garrison, are the powers to draw, and they will draw them in their own time. That peace is the colonial powers to write, and the defeated will have no part in it. We told last night how the war was fought. What stood in those mountains was not a rebellion, it was a state, and the man who built it was no wild chieftain of the European imagination. Abd el-Krim is the son of a Qadi, a judge of Mohammedan law, and was himself a man of the Spanish administration before he was its enemy. Educated in Spanish schools, employed in the Protectorate's offices, for a time a journalist in the Liga. He knew the empire he fought from the inside, in its own language. The republic he proclaimed was built accordingly, on Mohammedan political tradition in its law and its taxes, on modern republican forms in its ministries and its councils. An assembly of the tribes existed, however unevenly it sat. The design was his own. Correspondents who made the journey into the Rif during these 5 years brought back descriptions that surprised their readers, and the picture they drew was consistent. At Ajdir, on the bay the Spanish stormed last September, Abd el-Krim kept a capital, ministries, secretaries, record keepers, and administration of taxes, prisons, offices of military supply. His army's regular corps was drilled and ranked in the European manner. Companies of 300 to 500 under appointed commanders, subdivided down to squads, rank marked upon the turban, pay drawn by rank, discipline written in a code. Around that corps, the tribal levies gathered and dispersed, as mountain war has always raised them. But the corps did not disperse. Its artillery had a genealogy of its own. The first battery was Spanish, taken intact in the war's first summer at Abaran. The guns, gathered in the great rout of 1921, came after. And when the landing force stormed Al-Husaymas Bay last September, it was received by 10 emplaced batteries, 4 of them heavy pieces, served by Rif gunners, guns that had nearly all of them been Spain's. The Republic kept men who could repair what they captured, and the repair shop is as much a part of this story as the rifle. The state paid for itself as it could. It began rich. The stores the Spanish army abandoned in the great rout, and 4 million pesetas in ransom paid for the prisoners taken there. After that came taxes, the zakat upon harvests in the old Mohammedan form, fines levied on tribes that broke discipline, and a smuggling trade through Tangier, run with rowing boats and motor launches, a navy in miniature. And the Republic built. Roads, tracks mostly, but engineered ones, ran out from Ajdir east and west and south. A telephone network strung on wire bought from the French or stripped from the Spanish tied the capital to its fronts. Roads and telephone wire are instruments of state power. The Rif built them under bombardment, and the empires now inherit them. And the state's army grew with the state. In the first years, it fought as mountain peoples have always fought. Terrain, mobility, intelligence, the cutting off of posts and convoys. By last year, the men who faced it were no longer describing a guerrilla. The offensive into the French zone was reported by professional observers as a methodical, regular attack, and the gunnery that met the Al-Husaymas landing was the work of a force that had learned to stand and fight like the armies sent against it. The more the Republic became a state, the more its war became a war. That is what was extinguished today. Not a tribe brought to heel, but a state dismantled. The only state the colonial people has built and held against European arms in this decade. It existed. It governed through 5 years of war. And the record of it does not pass out of existence with the government. There is one more ledger to read, and it is read in Madrid, not in the mountains. Spain's African service has always been a poor man's service. The law of conscription let the better off purchase their sons, shorter terms and softer postings. And the ranks that filled the Moroccan garrisons were filled from the bottom of the wage scale. 17 years ago, when the reservists of Barcelona were called up for an earlier Moroccan campaign, that city rose rather than send them. A week of barricades, answered with executions. The quarrel between the Spanish worker and Spain's African war is older than the Rif Republic, and it has been conducted on the workers' side at a price. The destruction at Anuel 5 years ago did not stay in Africa. The Army's own inquiry into the disaster, 13,000 dead by its count, and a trail of negligence and worse running upward through the command, became the most dangerous document in Spain. The Cortes was preparing its reckoning with that document, and with whatever names it reached, when in September of 1923, General Primo de Rivera seized power, dissolved the parliament, and put an end to the proceeding. The accounting was never finished. Spain has been governed by the general's dictatorship from that day to this. A Spain with no sitting parliament, a press that passes the censor, government by decree under the king's assent. And it is that dictatorship which, with France beside it, has now won the war the old command lost. A colonial war, mismanaged, destroyed an army. The inquiry into the destruction threatened the men and the institutions responsible. A dictatorship arrived in time to bury the inquiry and stayed to win the war. Spain's own parliamentary government was among the first casualties of this war. A word more from Washington, where the Senate's committee sat yesterday upon the Passaic strike. The fuller accounts of the hearing now reaching us say the strikers' case was put in great part by an economist, Mr. Locke, who has done such work for the miners' unions before him, and that his argument was an argument of figures, that the mills, sheltered behind the tariff, have earned handsomely upon every yard of cloth they sell, while the wages beneath that cloth were cut. Profit upon protected profit set beside a wage that was thin before the cutting. A young worker from the botany mill testified beside him. The committee has the figures now. What it does with them, we shall report. And to the British coal fields. From Moscow, by dispatches some days old, the Communist International has issued a formal appeal for the support of the British miners, to the workers of every country, for funds and for pressure, now that the lockout enters its fourth week with the men unbroken. We reported in the strike's last days how the offered aid of the Soviet unions was refused by the General Council. The appeal published this week goes past the Council, to the miners directly, and to whoever will hear it. At home, meanwhile, no formula has been found. The owners hold to their terms, the men hold to theirs, and the government's offer of money to ease a settlement stands only to the end of the month, and the month is nearly out. The coalfield families that take the relief do not ask after its politics, nor whether it comes from Moscow or from the next parish. They ask only whether there is enough of it, and there is not. We will report what the appeal raises as the figures come. 3 matters carried here this week. From Warsaw, where we have followed Marshal Piłsudski's seizure of the capital. The fighting is over, but the law is not yet won. A National Assembly is to be summoned to choose a head of state, the Marshal expected to stand, and his camp is pressing now to put off the ordinary elections, with talk even of a referendum the Constitution does not provide for. From Beirut, the Republic has its first president seated, Mr. Charles de Bas, chosen by the Assembly under the new Constitution. And from Bucharest, the government landslide stands as the final count, with General Averescu returned in overwhelming force by the methods we described. A short dispatch from South China, and an incomplete one. The wires reaching us carry word of an exodus of civilians by boat for Hong Kong, with the families of Canton's own officials among those making for the harbor. What has set this movement going, the dispatch does not say. The report comes to us broken, only its tail preserved. Families are leaving Canton by water. Some of them are the families of the men who govern there. And the south of China remains, as it has been these many months, unquiet enough to be worth the watching. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Portugal, the army rose at Braga this morning. General Gomes da Costa has put himself at the head of the rising in the north. In Lisbon, the junta of officers has circulated its manifesto. The government has answered with a censorship of the press and assurances that few in Lisbon are said to believe. Whether the Portuguese Republic stands or falls is, as we go to air, an open question. From Britain, in the fourth week of the coal lockout, the country is being taught to live on half its fuel. The burning of coal, gas, and electricity has been cut by more than one-half since the stoppage began. London is said to be drawing about a quarter of the coal it would use in an ordinary summer. And tonight, a royal proclamation extends the emergency regulations another month. And the case of Sacco and Vanzetti, 6 years old this month, and the cause of a movement that reaches around the world, has been turned in these last days by another man's confession. From Calcutta, inside the walls of the Alipore jail, political prisoners have killed an officer of the Police Intelligence Service, and the case will be heard far beyond the prison walls. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole, Friday, the 28th of May, 1926. Portugal leads the report tonight, and the news arrived with the morning. At 6 o'clock today at Braga, in the north of the country, units of the army rose against the government of the Republic. At their head, having traveled north by motor car these past 2 days, by the accounts now reaching us, stands General Manuel Gomes da Costa, a soldier with a name from the Great War, where he commanded Portuguese troops in Flanders. In Lisbon the same day, a body styling itself a Junta of Public Salvation circulated a manifesto against the government. Among the names it carries are officers of the Navy as well as the Army. This is a rising with more than one head and more than one program, and that fact may matter greatly in the days ahead. The government's answer has been twofold: a censorship clamped upon the Portuguese press and a reassuring note declaring that only a part of the Braga garrison is in revolt. The censorship is a fact, the reassurance is a claim, and the foreign dispatches treat it as one. The censorship binds Lisbon's papers, not the foreign correspondence. What can be said with confidence tonight is this: the rising holds Braga. It is being answered ambiguously, or not at all, in other garrison towns, at Porto, at Coimbra, at Santarém. The picture is described as wavering rather than decided, and the general himself is already speaking to interviewers of a military government to come, perhaps a triumvirate of officers. He does not speak like a man who expects to be shot for this. Whether the Republic falls, and to whom, no one can tonight say. What is the government that the Army has risen against? The Portuguese Republic is 16 years old. In those 16 years, it has had 8 presidents and 45 ministries. A government falling, on the average, better than twice a year. It has weathered coups and counter-coups before. An attempt in April of last year was put down, and plainly it did not settle the question. And the instability was never only a matter of which men sat in the cabinet. It rested on something harder underneath. Portugal came out of the Great War on the winning side, and with very little to show for it. It had sent an expeditionary corps to Flanders, the corps the general at Braga once commanded, and brought home its dead, its debts, and a currency worth a fraction of its old value. Through the whole life of the Republic, the budgets never came right. The escudo fell and fell. Prices climbed faster than wages, and each new ministry inherited the same empty treasury the last one had left behind. The scandal over the tobacco monopoly that has filled the Lisbon papers this spring is a symptom rather than the disease. A state too poor and too weak to keep its own monopolies honest, and a political class quarreling over the leavings while the accounts run red. A republic that cannot pay its way and cannot hold a government together for 6 months at a stretch need not so much be overthrown as caught when it falls. Nor did this rising come from a clear sky. Lisbon has talked of little else for weeks, the press full of the tobacco scandal, the streets full of rumor that some solution outside the Parliament was preparing. Only 3 days ago, the government, in open quarrel with the Chamber of Deputies, ceased even to send its ministers to appear before it, a Parliament boycotted by its own cabinet. When a government will no longer face the Chamber, and the cafes are already naming the generals, the morning's news from Braga arrives less as a thunderclap than as a date filled in. That exhaustion of the parliamentary order is the rising's opportunity. The army does not need the country to love it. It needs only that not enough men will die for the Parliament. And that question tonight is the whole of Portuguese politics. The working class movement of Portugal, its unions anarcho-syndicalist in their leadership and temper, its Communist Party small and battered by police work, has given, by the first dispatches, no answer yet. Where labor stands when the army moves is a question this month has asked once already in Warsaw. Lisbon will answer it in its own way. The first word of that answer has yet to reach the wires. From Britain tonight, the coal stoppage has passed out of the headlines of open confrontation and into the duller, harder columns of administration. The general strike was called and called off this month. The great unions went back to work, and the miners, locked out since the 1st of May, stand now alone against the owners and the government together. But while the country waits to see how that contest of endurance ends, it is being quietly taught to do something it has not done in living memory, to live on half its fuel. The figures coming out of London tell the story plainly. Since the stoppage began, the nation's burning of coal, of gas, and of electric power has been cut by more than 1/2. London itself is said to be drawing about 1/4 of the coal it would consume in an ordinary summer. Inspectors go about tightening the rules on lighting and on every other use the authorities can reach. The lit shop window, the street lamp, the furnace kept warm without need are all now matters of public order. And tonight, a royal proclamation extends the emergency regulations, the special powers the government took to itself at the start of the crisis, for another month. A wage dispute in a single industry has become a question of how an entire country is to be lit, warmed, and moved. The state that could not or would not find the few millions it would have cost to keep the miners at their old wage has instead taken upon itself the management of the whole nation's supply of power, rationing it, policing it, and proclaiming its authority over it a month at a time. The lockout is no longer only a struggle between coal owners and coal miners. It has become a demonstration of how a modern government, faced with a stoppage at the very bottom of its economy, sets itself to govern the scarcity rather than remove its cause. The miners are to be starved back down to the pit. The public, in the meantime, is to be schooled in thrift and shown how well the country can manage without the men who hew its coal. Now to Massachusetts and the case this broadcast has carried in brief through the month. 2 weeks ago, the highest court of that state denied the latest motions of Nicholas Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. 6 years on, the case has become something larger than itself. In April of 1920, a paymaster named Frederick Parmenter and his guard, Alessandro Berardelli, were shot dead in a payroll robbery at a shoe factory in South Braintree, Massachusetts. 3 weeks later, 2 Italian immigrants were arrested. Nicholas Sacco, a shoe factory hand, a family man with a steady bench at his trade, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, who peddled fish in the streets of Plymouth. Both were anarchists of the militant tradition and made no secret of it. Both carried pistols when taken. Neither, the prosecution said, could give a good account of his movements. It was the height of the Red Scare, the year of the Palmer raids, of deportations by the boatload, of bombs and the fear of bombs. And the 2 men were arrested, charged, and tried in that weather. The first fact about this case, from which the rest descends, is that no one has ever had to ask what the 2 men believed. The question pressed for 6 years is what, if anything, they did. The trial at Dedham in 1921 convicted them both. It is the conduct of that trial that has been under attack ever since. The defense has pressed through 5 years of motions a case that runs so: that the jury was invited to convict 2 foreign anarchists rather than 2 particular men, that the ballistics evidence was contested at every link, that alibi witnesses, Italian-speaking, testifying through interpreters, were discounted wholesale, and that the judge who presided and who has since ruled upon every motion attacking his own trial ought not to have been the man to weigh them. Through 5 years the motions came: new witnesses, recanted testimony, fresh expert matter on the bullets, each new ground argued before the same bench that had presided at the start, and Judge Webster Thayer has denied each motion in turn. 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, reviewing the accumulated record of those years, declined to overturn him. The convictions stand. Sentence of death has not yet been pronounced. And then, this very week, the case turned again. 2 days ago, the defense filed a new motion at Dedham, of a different kind from all the others. It rests upon the confession of another man. Celestino Medeiros, a young Portuguese immigrant lying under sentence for a murder of his own, has sworn that he took part in the South Braintree robbery and that Sacco and Vanzetti had no part in it. The defense, following his statement, points toward a professional robbery gang out of Providence as the doers of the crime. The confession, it now appears, was made last autumn and held close while Medeiros' own case ran its course in the courts. This week it was filed and is public. The Commonwealth concedes nothing. The motion will be heard in its turn. But the legal road that looked 2 weeks ago to be nearly at its end has tonight a new and unmeasured stretch before it, and the defense says plainly that the case is not finished. What the courts have not settled, the world has taken up. The defense of these 2 men is no longer a Massachusetts matter, nor even a radical one alone. The Communist International has made the case a standing cause, and the Workers' Party organizes its defense meetings here. The industrial workers of the world were among the first to it. The civil liberties lawyers have joined. Even the American Federation of Labor, cautious in all things touching the red side of the movement, has spoken for a new trial. Meetings are held in the cities of 2 hemispheres. Men of letters and of the universities sign their names beside machinists and miners. The working class press of a dozen countries carries the case under its own standing word. The Massachusetts frame-up, it says plainly, where the American press says the Massachusetts case. 6 years after a payroll robbery, the names of a shoemaker and a fish peddler are known tonight wherever there is a labor press. Whatever the courts decide, that fact is already part of the history of this decade. And from India by the day's dispatches. In Calcutta, inside the Alipore Central Jail, an officer of the Police Intelligence Service, a deputy superintendent set over the surveillance of political prisoners, has been killed by 2 of those prisoners, young revolutionaries of Bengal, who struck him down with an iron bar within the walls. The accounts that travel with the news say the prisoners named the officer's treatment of them as their reason. The government's accounts name only the crime. The men were prisoners already. They are in the hands of the state entirely. To France now, and to money, which in the France of this year is never far from politics. Monsieur Henry Beringer, the French ambassador at Washington, is on his way home across the Atlantic, and he has not waited to reach French soil before opening his campaign. The thing he means to sell to his countrymen is the agreement he set his own name to at Washington in April. A settlement of what France owes the United States for the Great War. The debt is the war's long shadow. France borrowed to fight, borrowed from across the ocean to hold the line in the years before America came in, and after. And the loans did not die with the men they bought. Now the bill is rendered, and the figure runs to billions, payable over more than 60 years. Beringer argues that France must ratify, and ratify soon, that her credit abroad and the standing of the franc itself depend upon her being seen to acknowledge her debts and arrange to pay them. The franc has been under strain for months. A currency is, in the end, a promise, and a promise is only as good as the creditor's confidence in it. So, a great nation, victorious in the field, finds its money quietly disciplined from abroad. Its budgets, its taxes, its very standing in the world weighed against an account kept in dollars in New York and Washington. The war was won, men said, with French blood and American gold. The gold, it now appears, is the part that must be paid back with interest. Whether the French Parliament will swallow the terms Berenger carries home is a reckoning the deputies have yet to face. Two of the week's running stories first, in brief. From North Africa, Abdel Krim, having given himself into French hands rather than Spanish, is now a captive of the Republic, and his fate rests with Paris. And from Poland, a fortnight after the fighting in Warsaw, Marshal Piłsudski holds the decisive power, but the country still has no settled head of state, and the constitutional question this broadcast set before you a fortnight ago stands where it stood. And a few notes from the day's other pages, where the world goes on about its ordinary business. From the American South, the War Department has named several Georgia institutions honor schools for the showing of their reserve officer companies, their cadets judged among the best drilled in the land. The reserve officer training that earns the honor goes on in the schoolroom now as much as the barracks. From the same state, a note of another kind. Georgia reports its peach season open, and open well. The dispatches out of Macon say the early Mayflower shipments are already moving north by rail, that the growers are speaking of a crop unusually large and of unusually high quality, and that the California fruit is expected to give them little competition in the early market. It is a small thing beside the fall of governments, but the price of a peach in a northern city this summer is being settled tonight in a Georgia orchard, and the men who grow it know as much. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night.